Chapter 221, Raising Funds. The Navy's headquarters simply didn't have the resources right now to counter the Rockefeller pirates' latest invasion of the New World. Still, Fleet Admiral Kong sent Sengoku out to the New World to keep an eye on all the pirate activity. In the weeks since, not only have the Rockefellers been running amok, they've annihilated 8 kingdoms in a single onslaught, but other pirate crews have seized the chance to push their own agendas. Word of the Rockefellers' devastation spread like wildfire, leaving both civilians and officials alike reeling. From his flagship, Admiral Shiji could hardly contain his excitement as he surveyed the reports. Ha 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 ha! The Rockefellers think they're the only ones who can sow chaos? Not on our watch. Get word to those kingdoms. They have 2 choices: surrender to the Sky Pirates or suffer a fate worse than the Rockefellers' victims. Yes, Admiral. Ski responded with a salute, snatching the latest casualty reports and hurling them at the nearest courier. Within moments, Shiji's orders swept through the ranks. Officers and lieutenants scrambled to convey the ultimatum, and the Sky Pirates launched a series of lightning raids across the region. Almost every day brought fresh news of raids and shifting allegiances. Towns that fell under the pirate flag remained untouched, but any kingdom still flying its own banner found itself besieged without mercy. Chaos reigned, kingdoms toppled, rulers went into hiding, and desperate pleas for aid echoed across the seas. Yet nowhere seemed safe from the scramble for gold and the thirst for power. The New World had become a battleground for every pirate crew seeking to line their coffers, and the only guarantee was that the storm of violence would only grow fiercer from here. In the latter half of the voyage, almost every kingdom in the New World turned to the Whitebeard pirates for protection. Once Whitebeard's flag was raised over a territory, rival crews dared not lift a finger. It was a harsh lesson for all. In today's New World, pirate power reigns supreme, and the world government's banners are effectively meaningless. Small nations, repeatedly raided and left undefended by the Marines, learned that the only true safeguard lay in the pirate kingdoms. Wherever a great captain hoisted his colors, none more respected than Whitebeard's, other pirates steered clear. Even the notorious John Silver Axe couldn't bring himself to challenge Whitebeard's claimed waters. Amid the shattered remains of a coastal fortress, Barrett and his swordsman's detachment worked swiftly. They hauled chest after chest of treasure up a makeshift ramp and stacked them aboard their flagship. From a few paces away, Barrett watched Carter, Wolf, and Isaac, his 3 most trusted lieutenants, tally the haul. "We've done it!" Wolf cheered, his eyes shining as he counted coin after coin. 15 ships packed to the gunwales, looted from 8 different kingdoms. Isaac grinned, slapping his palm against the side of a treasure chest so vigorously that a few gold doubloons clinked to the wooden floor. Carter, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his tally sheets and nodded approvingly. Barrett surveyed the bounty: jeweled goblets, resinous incense, silken tapestries, and enough gold to make them all rich beyond their wildest dreams. He allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. With this haul secured, their legend in the New World would grow all the faster, as would the protection their flag now promised to any kingdom desperate enough to hoist it. Charles stood on the deck of his ship, eyes fixed on the distant shoreline. He tapped his saber hilt and addressed his crew. "Remember," he said, voice calm but firm, "our true prizes aren't in the king's treasury. He barely scrapes together enough to pay his soldiers. Our real targets are the noble merchants and ministers who hold the real wealth." Ever since joining the Rock's pirates, Charles had raided coastal strongholds again and again. He knew how little a king's coffers could hold, some glittering bauble, a handful of gold coins, but compared to the nobles under his banner, the monarch was nearly penniless. Individually, no single merchant lord or minister might seem unimaginably rich, but together they controlled the lion's share of a kingdom's fortune. Charles estimated that nobles and wealthy traders guarded roughly 90% of all precious stores. The king and commoners made do with the rest. That was why Charles refused to waste time plundering villages. Once a settlement was stripped of every last coin and barrel of oil, there was nothing left but desperate survivors. He had no taste for empty raids. His orders were always clear: strike at the heart of power by targeting the merchant caravans, the fortified manor houses, the treasury vaults of the ministers themselves. The recent spike in raw material prices only proved his point. Charles was convinced the noble consortium had rigged the markets, hiking up costs while they tucked away the profits. They believed their alliances would protect them, that a lone pirate couldn't touch them. They had never reckoned on Charles refusing to play by anyone's rules. With a wave of his hand, Charles signaled the attack. Lanterns swung into position, sails snapped tight, and the Rock's pirates prepared to test the nobles' defenses for themselves. They might be powerful on paper, but on the open sea under Charles's command, no ledger was safe. Barrett wasted no time. At his command, the troops swept through the surrounding kingdoms, leaving no chance for a counterattack. His orders were clear: devastate first, sort out the spoils later. With Barrett leading the vanguard, even the thickest city walls crumbled under their assault. Once the resistance was crushed, sailors began hauling treasure-laden crates aboard the flagship. Barrett himself oversaw the loading of one particularly heavy, sealed case. Inside lay the sea's most coveted prizes, devil fruits, looted from royal treasuries and noble vaults. Each fruit was a marvel of power, and Barrett handled the case with painstaking care, unwilling to risk even the smallest blemish. He could already picture Captain Charles's reaction. The young man's rare indulgence was collecting devil fruits, a pastime whispered about from port to port. Barrett knew that when Charles saw this haul, he'd be laughing with delight. By dusk, the fleet, over 30 ships strong, up from just 13, slipped out of the harbor, each vessel groaning under its stolen bounty. 3 days later, Charles stood at the edge of the harbor, sea spray cooling his face as he watched the horizon. In the wake of Barrett's decisive victory over the 8 kingdoms and the wealth they'd seized, he already knew what would happen next. A cheering throng had gathered behind him, soldiers, sailors, and townsfolk alike, each eager for their share of the spoils. No one dared protest. Every profit-hungry soul stood to gain from this triumph. Far out on the water, tiny black dots shimmered in the afternoon haze. As they drew nearer, those specks coalesced into warships, sleek hulls gliding steadily toward the port. Ivan, Charles's first lieutenant, leaned in and whispered, "Sir, they're on their way back." Charles allowed himself a small, triumphant grin. "Just as well," he replied. "They nearly sailed off without me." At his side, Captain Estes bristled. He folded his arms and let out a cold snort. "If they'd given me the chance." But before Estes could finish, Jenny, a junior officer, gave him a sharp tug on the sleeve. Charles caught the exchange out of the corner of his eye and offered Estes a stern, silent look. The message was clear. This was not the moment for quarrels. He thought back to Esdeth's absence. Initially, Charles had planned to punish her for defying orders, yet every report of her exploits on the battlefield had softened his resolve. She'd led a strike force deep into enemy territory, routed entire garrisons, and even matched blades with the legendary Warrior One. In the end, her ruthless effectiveness outweighed any lapse in discipline. The Saint ships of Barrett's fleet slipped into harbor, sails still billowing with momentum. Cheers rippled through the crowd as the crew disembarked, laden with chests of plunder. Charles straightened his posture, preparing to greet them. Whatever disagreements had simmered ashore, here at this moment, all that mattered was victory, and the fortunes it promised to all who had waited patiently at the docks. Charles didn't face any punishment for the heavy losses, but neither did he receive an outright reward. In a way, that alone made up for the sacrifices. Boom! The anchor slammed into the sea. Barrett descended the gangway, cradling a wooden chest in his arms. "Captain, the mission you entrusted to me is complete," he announced. Before him stood Charles. The man towering over them all, nearly 4 meters tall, offered a deep bow. "Excellent work. I haven't forgotten a single one of your achievements. A celebratory feast has been arranged in your honor. Everyone, follow me." Charles cast his gaze over the men who had rallied behind Barrett, just over 1,000 survivors of the more than 2,000 who had set sail. No matter how formidable Barrett was on the attack, tragedy had been unavoidable on the high seas. Of the original force, only 800 remained. Charles acknowledged the truth. His land tactics were sound, but his naval strategy needed sharpening. He vowed to improve. Barrett stepped forward and presented the chest. Charles accepted it, steadying his excitement even though he already knew what lay inside. Ahead of them, Charles's castle awaited, its great doors soon to open on a hall where maids were already laying tables and lighting candles for the long-awaited banquet. Chapter 222. Charles closed the secret hatch and tucked the devil fruit and the famous blade safely inside. Now wasn't the time to examine them further. The rest of the crew was already gathering in the great hall for the victory banquet. He strode down the staircase, mounted the dais at its center, and raised his wine glass. "Attention, everyone," he called, his voice ringing out over the chatter. "Lift your glasses high and toast our triumph." He tilted his cup. "To victory. Drink." A roar of agreement swept through the hall as every sailor and officer raised their goblets and drank deeply. Faces flushed with merriment. As the clatter of emptied cups echoed, Charles continued, "I will not forget a single soul who fought on this expedition. Every crew member present earns 100 million Baileys. Team leaders receive 200 million, and our senior officers a full billion each. Even those who remain behind on the island shall be granted 50 million. He waved an imperious hand. At his side, Ivan, his quartermaster, scrambled for his notebook. Pen scratching, he ran through the sums. The longer he calculated, the deeper his frown grew. Chapter 7. The New Deputy. The reward for this mission was pegged at over 20 billion yuan, an astonishing sum that sent murmurs rippling through every pirate outpost. But Charles had yet another announcement. "One more thing," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crew. "I hereby appoint Douglas Barrett as deputy captain of the Rockefeller Pirates. His courage, skill, and integrity are beyond question. No one here will object to Barrett serving as our second-in-command." He pointed directly at Barrett. The young swordsman froze. Every eye in the harbor swung toward him. Barrett's cheeks flushed as he shook his head. "Captain, I appreciate the trust, but I'm not suited for such an important role. I'm still too young and inexperienced. Please choose someone else." A ripple of soft laughter ran through the pirates, but Charles only smiled. "Barrett, don't sell yourself short. Age doesn't define leadership. I've seen you take charge in battle, rally the men, and protect this crew when it mattered most. That's why you're the perfect choice for deputy captain." He let his words hang in the salty air before adding firmly, "So do you accept?" Barrett glanced at the expectant faces around him, his friends, his shipmates, all awaiting his answer. With a steadying breath, he met Charles's eyes and nodded. "Yes, Captain, I will serve as your deputy." A roar of approval erupted from the Rockefeller pirates, echoing against the timbered docks. In that triumphant moment, Barrett's fate was sealed. Side by side with Charles, he would navigate the perilous seas and carve their names into pirate legend. "If I appoint you as my deputy captain," Charles announced with a firm nod, "I trust you'll exceed every expectation. Don't let me down." He waved his hand dismissively and then broke into a broad laugh. "Now, raise your glasses to our new comrade." "To the deputy captain." Charles led the toast, lifting his goblet high. "To the deputy captain." The crew roared back in unison, the clang of wine cups echoing through the hall. All around, men were celebrating Barrett's promotion to second-in-command. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Carter's gaze remained fixed on Barrett's retreating shoulders, his expression hardening. He had been certain the deputy captaincy was his by right, or at least that the position wouldn't be filled at all. Barrett's appointment had shattered those assumptions. Carter's hand curled into a tight fist around his goblet. He held it there for a long, tense moment before slowly unclenching. At 12 years old, Barrett had already outmatched him in every trial. No wonder the captain had chosen Barrett. His talent and resolve left no doubt. With a reluctant sigh, Carter lifted his own cup and followed the toast in silence. Charles swept his eyes across the gathered faces, searching for any hint of dissent, or perhaps recognition of the choice he'd made. Carter's subtle maneuver did not escape Charles's notice, though the young officer threw himself into his duties with commendable zeal. Even so, Charles knew all too well that the rank of vice captain demanded more than diligence. It demanded real strength. With the formal announcement that Barrett would serve as mate, the long-awaited celebration began. Silver platters heaped with delicacies were borne in, and the song and dance troupe launched into their first number. A hushed, joyful atmosphere settled over the hall. After days of relentless fighting, everyone was bone-tired and eager to relax. Charles and his subordinates lifted their goblets in friendly toasts. Laughter and clinking glass filled the night, and the banquet stretched well past midnight. Only when the candles burned low did a maid gently guide a swaying Charles back to his quarters. The moment he crossed the threshold, a faint white mist, tinged with the sharp scent of wine, drifted from his skin. Gradually, his bleary eyes cleared. He was far from incapacitated. He had merely activated his life return ability. Charles wasn't afraid of getting drunk. Even if an assassin tried to strike him in his stupor, the merest spark of killing intent would flare in his mind, and he would be ready. Charles felt his strength and vitality snap back almost instantly. He was fully restored to his prime. A wild grin spread across his face. "Ha! I can't wait to open these treasure boxes." He strode into the secret chamber and hauled out the container Barrett had recovered. A cabinet-like box nearly 2 meters tall, almost as towering as Charles himself now that he'd reached his full height. With a grunt, he swung open the hefty doors and stared in awe at the 13 smaller chests neatly lined up on the shelves. 13 devil fruits, the largest haul he'd ever seen. The 8 kingdoms had truly outdone themselves. Charles's pulse raced as he carried each box back to his desk. A handful already bore inscriptions naming the fruit inside. The rest were mysteries waiting to be solved. He retrieved his devil fruit compendium from the safe and began flipping through its heavy pages. Of the 13 fruits, only 3 had been cataloged so far. 1. Zone type, rabbit fruit, lop rabbit, model 2. Zone type, rabbit fruit, lion rabbit model. Zone type, cat fruit, Congo lion model. 10 boxes remained unmarked, unknown treasures just begging to be uncovered. Charles studied the small wooden box before him, where 8 glossy devil fruits lay nestled like gems. He sighed. Every fruit he'd opened so far had turned out to be a zoan type, animal fruits. Aside from the Congo lion fruit, which he planned to hand off to his subordinates, the rest were destined for his maidservant's quirks. He tapped the last 8 with a trace of hope in his chest. 8 left. Please, be something special. He padded into the washroom, scrubbed his hands, and splashed cold water on his face until the fog of disappointment cleared. Returning to the chest, he let his fingers linger on the lids of the remaining fruits. One by one, he lifted them out to examine their shapes. None resembled bananas this time, which meant there was roughly an 80% chance this next one wouldn't be a zone beast. He picked up the oddest fruit yet. Its top half was a deep crimson. The bottom gleamed cobalt blue. He'd never seen such a striking bicolored devil fruit. Quickly, he flipped open his illustrated devil fruit compendium to the zoan section. If it was in there, he'd recognize it by its shape. Pages rustled beneath his fingertips as he searched for a matching entry. Animal, canine model, red fox form, blue fox form. But the page he needed eluded him. His heart thumped. He rifled through the book faster, desperate to confirm the fruit's identity. "No," Charles muttered, snatching at loose sheets and glossing over every illustration twice. The thicker the pile of turned pages, the more he feared he'd overlooked something crucial. His pulse raced. This fruit could change everything if only he could find its record. No, if it isn't a logia, then it must be paramecia, but it can't be a zoan unless it's a mythical zoan. Charles muttered to himself as he thumbed through the massive devil fruit compendium. So many entries. He tore through page after page, hardly noticing the blur of words. After more than 10 pages, he finally froze. Here it is. I found it. It's actually... Chapter 223, Devil Fruit Wholesale. Charles flipped through the Devil Fruit illustrated book until he found the entry for the temperature fruit. According to the text, it was a paramecia-type devil fruit that let its user vary their body temperature between 0 degrees and 100 degrees Celsius, and, once awakened, to control the surrounding air temperature as well. He frowned. 100-degree limit? That seemed remarkably restricted. His daughter's cry fruit could already chill the environment to nice 30 degrees in an instant. From the fruit's name alone, he'd assumed it could unleash searing, near unthinkable heat, perhaps tens of thousands of degrees Celsius if properly mastered. Why this modest ceiling? Charles tapped the page thoughtfully. Maybe the restriction applied only before the fruit awakened. If that were true, the real power would lie dormant until the user's devil fruit reached its full potential. He closed the book, then carried the strange, mottled fruit to his secure vault. With a decisive click, he slid it onto the second shelf and locked the door behind him. Whatever hidden strength this temperature fruit possessed, he would be ready when it finally broke free of its limits. Charles continued his search, noting that 7 devil fruits still remained unopened. He reached for the next box, a pineapple-shaped container, its surface covered in intricate, snowflake-like patterns. The moment he laid eyes on the fruit inside, he frowned in surprise. It can't be. The snow fruit? How did this end up here? Gingerly, Charles lifted the snow-white devil fruit from its nest. Its previous eater had been Monet, Doflamingo's ice-wielding subordinate. Once consumed, the snow fruit grants the user the power to transform their body into pure snow and to summon blizzards within a limited radius. As a Logia-type ability, it renders its wielder immune to all non-elemental physical attacks. Any shattered fragments of their snowy form instantly coalesce back into place. The sheer volume of snow they produce scales with their own strength. Classified as a low-tier Logia under the nature category, often nicknamed the freezing fruit, its one glaring weakness is extreme heat. Flame and magma powers are its arch-nemesis, capable of melting away its icy defenses in an instant. Charles set the snow fruit aside, suddenly more alert than ever to the dangers and opportunities hidden in these mysterious boxes. Charles studied the shui fruit in his hand, marveling at its power. The volume, range, and density of ice and snow it could unleash grew in direct proportion to its user's strength. Natural-type devil fruits were almost impossibly rare, yet here he had another. Alongside the swamp fruit and the gas fruit and the thunder fruit he'd already stashed away, this snow fruit brought his total to 4 of the 11 elemental fruits from the original legend. Pure luck, he told himself. Ha ha ha! I can't believe my fortune. Charles laughed, a thrill running through him. He placed the shui fruit carefully atop his safe, right next to the other prized devil fruits. Then he turned to the remaining treasure chests. 6 more, he murmured, pulling open the next lock. The lid creaked, and inside lay a cluster of golden-yellow bananas, each marked by a dense tangle of black stripes. Banana-shaped, please don't let this be an animal fruit. Charles's eyes gleamed with excitement. He'd already harvested so many valuable devil fruits, yet his appetite only seemed to grow. With a swift motion, he flipped open the thick, leather-bound devil fruit illustrated book and began scanning its crowded pages. Nearly half of the entries were beasts, ordinary animals, mythical creatures, and everything in between. He thumbed forward page after page until a single line stopped him cold. Zoo Department, Ancient China, King Crocodile. His heart raced. An ancient species. Charles had spent more than a decade hunting down every animal and beast-type devil fruit he could find, but he'd never encountered one marked ancient. He leaned closer, absorbing every detail. Ancient devil fruits, he knew, boasted far greater powers, superior regeneration, unmatched strength. Simply holding one was proof of legendary status. Eager to make room, Charles tucked the golden banana fruit he'd snagged earlier onto the third shelf of his display cabinet. The shelf was almost too small for his ambitions, but today it would receive its first true prize. Gently cradling the king crocodile fruit in both hands, he placed it beside the banana. The smooth, mottled green skin of the crocodile fruit seemed to pulse with dormant might, as if acknowledging its new master. Charles stepped back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. The third shelf, at last, had found its crown jewel, and he had no doubt that this ancient devil fruit would reshape his destiny. Charles pressed his fingers against the lid of the next treasure chest and wrenched it open. The box itself was carved in the shape of a cantaloupe, but its skin was glossy obsidian black. Inside lay another devil fruit, resting on a cushion of crimson velvet. Grinning, Charles snatched up his illustrated devil fruit guide and flipped through its pages until he found the entry for this mysterious fruit. Superhuman obsidian fruit, he read aloud, grants the user the ability to encase their entire body in obsidian, an almost impenetrable defense. He paused, tapping his finger on the page. Obsidian defense. It sounded a lot like the diamond fruit he'd seen in action before. He remembered the boy who wielded that power, how his body sparkled like a gem when he blocked a cannonball. If the obsidian fruit was even half as strong, it would be a perfect addition to his collection. Carefully, Charles placed the smooth, black fruit on the second shelf of his secure cabinet. 10 chests down, 13 devil fruits total, only 4 remained unopened, and he could hardly contain his excitement. He moved on to the next box, pried off its lid, and revealed yet another melon-shaped treasure. This one was a vivid green, its surface patterned with little capsule-like nodules that rippled under the light. Charles steeled himself for what powers might lie within this strange, speckled Hami melon. 4 chests left, 4 unknown fruits, and he was determined to claim them all. Charles sensed immediately that this devil fruit must have a remarkable history. He couldn't wait to open the devil fruit compendium again. Flipping past the familiar entries, he soon found what he was looking for. Superhuman medical fruit grants the user the power to create a variety of capsule medicines. Advanced pharmacological knowledge is required to concoct and correctly dose each remedy. At once, Charles's eyes gleamed. This fruit was practically broken in its potential. In skilled hands, it could cure any ailment, everything from common colds to rare epidemics, simply by manufacturing the right pills. The only catch was that the user needed a solid grasp of pharmacology. Luckily, Charles had recently recruited just such an expert, Nikin, whose mastery of drug formulation was unrivaled among the Rockefeller pirates. Holding the fruit carefully in his palm, Charles weighed his options. Nikin's talents would make her the perfect candidate to wield this power, yet she'd only been with the crew for 6 months, and her loyalty still needed confirmation. Better to wait a little longer, he decided, tucking the superhuman medical fruit away in a secure pouch. After all, power this great demanded the utmost caution. Charles hesitated. What if Nikin grabbed the devil fruit and bolted, crying out for help the moment he got his hands on it? He'd still have to keep him close. Carefully, Charles set the fruit back on the second shelf and moved on to the next wooden crate. Lifting its lid, he discovered a deep red apple streaked with inky black veins. As soon as he picked it up, a gentle warmth pulsed through his palm. Charles flipped open his devil fruit guidebook and turned the pages until, a few moments later, he found the matching illustration and description. Chapter 224, Devil Fruit in Bulk. Charles stared at the crate before him, perplexed. Stenciled across its side in bold letters was the label, Superman Series Hot Fruit. Isn't this the same devil fruit Charlotte Owen, or, in the original tale, Charlotte Linlin, ate? He murmured. How had it ended up here, in the warehouses of these kingdoms? Charles paced, turning the question over in his mind. In the original story, Big Mom's crews swept through these very aisles, seizing any devil fruits they could find. It made sense, then, that they'd stockpile hot fruits here, just as the Rockefeller pirates or the Big Mom pirates might have. Kamai Island, Charles's current base, sits closer to the latter half of the New World, while Big Mom's Totland Sea territory lies in the first half. Ships bound for the heart of the New World rarely detoured into Totland. The weather there is notoriously foul, the seas unnavigable. Any crew hoping to transit safely would steer well clear of her domain, until now. He lifted the crate's lid and peered inside. The fruit's rough, mottled surface reminded him of a sizzling ember. According to the faded parchment tag, whoever consumed this devil fruit could raise their body temperature at will. They could heat anything they touched, turning iron into molten metal or singeing an unwary opponent. Even an enemy at a distance wouldn't be safe. The user could radiate blistering heat through the air itself. Charles closed the crate gently. Whoever had shipped these hot fruits in bulk was either remarkably bold or desperately cunning. In either case, their arrival here was bound to set the seas on fire. Charles paused, recalling Owen's devil fruit ability as described in the original novel. With a single touch, Owen could transfer his own heat into any object, instantly heating it to fiery temperatures. He could superheat his body to burn anyone who dared to grab him. He could even channel that power into the sea itself, boiling the water and cooking marine life alive. Ships caught in his path would warp and blister from the sudden heat, and those who dove in after him found themselves scalded by the superheated waves. It had been one of the most spectacular powers in the book, and Charles had never forgotten it. Setting the hot, Scalding fruit back into its protective crate, Charles turned his attention to the next compartment of the devil fruit catalog. He lifted the lid and peered inside. There, resting on a bed of straw, was a fruit he'd never seen before. Smooth-skinned, its surface rippling in hues of deep burgundy and violet. It was unmistakably pear-shaped. Charles's heart skipped a beat. "This might be it," he murmured, leaning closer. He rifled through the boxes one by one, eyes scanning for that familiar pear silhouette. Box after box revealed fruits of every conceivable form, stars, gourds, even spiky spheres, but none matched the exact shape he sought. Each time he thought he'd found it, a closer look proved it wrong. At last, after exhausting the entire illustrated catalog, he slammed the final box shut with a frustrated thud. "Damn it," Charles groaned, rubbing his temples. The elusive pear-shaped devil fruit he'd come so far to find remained stubbornly out of reach. Charles stared in disbelief at the strange purple pear in his hand. "This can't be a devil fruit we've never seen before." He flipped through his ledger of devil fruits again, just in case he'd skimmed past it too quickly, but the page after page of meticulously drawn fruit yielded no match. Charles frowned. Unknown fruit? He set the ledger down, rubbed his chin, and sighed. He simply couldn't risk giving this mystery fruit to one of his children. If it turned out to be some disgusting snot fruit or excrement fruit, he'd feel guilty the rest of his life. No, he wouldn't let them gamble with their fates on an unknown. Still, he had no shortage of devil fruits in his vault. Let his subordinates take the chance. If they were lucky, they'd gain tremendous power. If they were unlucky, well, that would be on their own head. Charles was prepared to live by that rule. His gaze drifted to two unopened boxes sitting on the table beside him, left untouched since the banquet had ended. It was already 1 o'clock in the morning, and the long day had finally wound down. With a decisive nod, he popped the lids off both boxes. The soft clink of metal met his ears as he peered inside to see what new surprises or dangers awaited. Charles knew he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. After gathering so many devil fruits, his mind buzzed with excitement. How he wished for a system like those in the novels he used to read, something that would activate whenever he stood before a new devil fruit, or even summon allies to his side. But this was reality, not fiction. He'd spent over 10 years in this world without any system, no miraculous golden finger to save him. Waiting until he turned 100 for a longevity system was laughable. There was no point in dwelling on impossible dreams. He took a deep breath and refocused on the two devil fruits lying before him. One taupe, the other a deep ocean blue, both shaped like apples. Charles flipped through the pages of his illustrated devil fruit guidebook, scanning each entry with growing anticipation. At last, he found it. The brownish-gray fruit on the page matched the one in his hand. Paramecia-type Sekoseki Seki fruit, he read aloud, also called the stone fruit. This is another fruit once held by Doflamingo. Charles studied the taupe fruit, tracing its rough, rock-like rind with his fingertips. "I'm sorry, Brother Doflamingo," he murmured, a half-smile forming on his lips. "I've claimed another devil fruit from under your nose, but mark my words, it won't be the last." Despite the lateness of the hour, his heart pounded with eager anticipation. He could already feel the adventure beginning. Charles bowed his head and offered a silent apology to himself, the weight of his earlier guilt easing just a little. In truth, his mistake mattered less now than the power he wielded. The shishi fruit was a rare, superhuman devil fruit, so close to a natural one that even seasoned devil fruit experts regarded it as nearly flawless. Its ability was deceptively simple. Wherever the user placed a hand, they could fuse with the rock beneath it, absorbing every property, color, texture, hardness, into their very being. With that power, a user could grow into a colossal stone giant in an instant, swelling in size and strength according to their own physical limits. A shard of their original body served as the core, while the assimilated stone formed a layered, impenetrable armor. In combat, a shishi fruit user became a walking fortress, each blow capable of toppling walls. They could even phase through solid rock by melding with it from within, or seize control of entire stone structures simply by touching them. Siege towers, fortress walls, underground caverns, none were safe once the shishi fruit's power awakened. That staggering potential explained why so many coveted the shishi fruit, and now that power flowed through Charles himself. Charles discovered that certain empowered individuals could fuse their bodies with rock, transforming themselves into living stone. In this form, they could stretch and reshape their limbs like elastic, merge seamlessly with the ground, or flow through the earth to ambush unsuspecting foes. Any rock under their sway became an extension of their body, so a seemingly immovable cliff face could erupt forward and pin an opponent until they were crushed like a grotesque sandwich. Even if a user's stony form were shattered to fragments, they could slowly reassemble themselves, knitting every jagged piece back into a whole, though full recovery took precious time. Their power wasn't limited to raw boulders either. Any structure or tree rooted in stone became part of their domain. At will, they could remodel buildings, reroute paths, or alter entire landscapes to suit their strategy. This astonishing ability was precisely what made Pika such a formidable foe during the Dofla Mingo incident. Yet, in the original tale's final act, the Shishi no Mi, the lion fruit, ultimately proved wasted in the wrong hands. Its last wielder fell swiftly before the protagonists, his fruit's true potential never fully unleashed. Charles set the shishi fruit aside and fixed his gaze on the final devil fruit. As the last one available, he prayed it would be top tier, ideally a mythical zoan. If not, at least a natural zoan would do. An ancient zoan wasn't out of the question, but under no circumstances did he want a run-of-the-mill animal form. Chapter 225, Devil Fruit Inventory. Charles flipped through his reference book, silently hoping for a powerful devil fruit. Finally, he spotted an entry. Superman Glass Fruit? The description was frustratingly brief, just 3 words. Creates glass, transforms into glass. He turned the strange, pockmarked fruit over in his hand, brow furrowed. A paramecia devil fruit that only made glass, and let you become glass yourself? Glass was famously brittle. Unless it was specially tempered, it shattered at the slightest shock. What tactical advantage could this offer? Still, he tried to imagine its possibilities. What if he could reinforce his creations, infusing them with enough toughness to rival Lord Cracker's biscuit soldiers? Entire ranks of glass warriors, gleaming and unbreakable. If only the fruit could somehow harden its output, the idea might not be as crazy as it sounded. For now, Charles tucked the fruit into the second shelf of his secure cabinet, right beside the Superman fruit. His custom-designed safe had 3 tiers. The top shelf held only natural artifacts, strictly limited to 3 priceless items. The middle shelf stored all his devil fruits, and the bottom was reserved for weapons and miscellaneous equipment. With a soft click, the cabinet door sealed shut. Charles stepped back, determined to keep an open mind about the Superman glass fruit's hidden potential. Charles stood in the dimly lit vault, surveying his carefully arranged collection. On the second tier sat the superhuman devil fruits, the swamp fruit, gas fruit, snow fruit, and the dozen others he'd amassed over the years. The bomb fruit, sickle fruit, slow fruit, mirror fruit, gate fruit, lush fruit, temperature fruit, heat fruit, obsidian fruit, medicine fruit, stone fruit, and glass fruit. 12 in all, each one destined for one of his future offspring. Up on the third tier, reserved for animal devil fruits, lay the fearsome ancient king crocodile. Beside it, 2 rare mythical zoan fruits rested in velvet-lined niches, the vampire fruit and the artificially created blue dragon fruit. Finally, in a hidden compartment, Charles had stashed an enigmatic, unclassified fruit, its properties still a mystery. These were more than trophies, they were the foundations of his legacy. He already had 13 children, and counting. In this age, there was no bureaucratic limit on childbirth. Each pregnancy felt like drawing a winning ticket in the lottery, and so far, his luck had held. More than once, 2 or 3 children had arrived at once, to his astonishment and delight. Charles smiled to himself and shook his head. Was he showing off? Probably. Yet every time Ivan griped about money, Charles couldn't help but feel vindicated. These priceless devil fruits weren't just power, they were his assurance that his family's future would be unmatched. He closed the vault door with a soft click, confident that whatever challenges lay ahead, he had already prepared for them. Charles Rockefeller lay rigid in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. It was past 2 in the morning, but sleep wouldn't come. How could it? He was Charles Rockefeller, captain of the Rockefeller Pirates, one of the New World's 4 emperors, the world's greatest swordsman, the bloody swordsman himself. And yet tonight, he felt ridiculous. Every time he thought of facing legends like Whitebeard or Golden Lion Shiki in the future, his cheeks burned with shame. He was the Pirate King's equal in strength, yet here he was, mulling over thoughts that made him want to sink through the deck. He shook his head. Get rid of it. Stop overthinking. Just sleep, he muttered, glancing at his brass alarm clock. It's already past 2 o'clock. He lay back down, closing his eyes. For a moment, Charles felt the weight lift from his shoulders, and then, wide awake again, he slipped quietly out of bed. His footsteps were light as he opened the cabin door and slipped into the next room. Moonlight painted long shadows on the floorboards. "What are you doing?" came a soft, sleepy voice. "It's so," undead like a young woman roused from a deep slumber, coquettish, a little impatient. Charles froze. He gripped the hem of the mattress behind her. "Hey, just hold still," he hissed. "I promise I won't. Move." In the narrow room, there followed a series of muffled sounds, an odd scuffle of limbs, a brief gasp, and then silence. By dawn's first light, Charles re-emerged from that room, looking inexplicably refreshed. The captain's shoulders were straighter, his step lighter. Whatever had happened in the night, he had somehow banished his embarrassment, and in its place, a newfound confidence gleamed in his eyes. Charles must have been awake all night, yet he strode back to his quarters, brimming with energy. He bent over the table, carefully gathered up the 4 devil fruits laid out the day before, and packed them into his suitcase. Pausing, he turned to the heavy vault set into the wall. With a practiced combination, he opened it and withdrew a small, ornate box containing the artificially engineered Qinglong fruit. He closed the vault, tucked the Qinglong box under one arm, and headed for the door. "Monica," he called as he stepped into the corridor. The head maid, Monica, who had served him faithfully for nearly 8 years, looked up in surprise. Charles handed her the box filled with the 4 fruits. "Take these and divide them as you see fit. I trust your judgment entirely." At the earnest gleam in his eyes, Monica knew better than to ask questions. Gently, she lifted the lid of the box and peered inside. Lop-eared rabbit fruit, lion rabbit fruit, red fox fruit, blue fox fruit. Each one was a bizarre fusion of 2 creatures. The combinations felt more and more perverse with every new discovery, and Monica felt her cheeks warm. Stifling a blush, she managed a brisk nod. "Yes, sir. I'll distribute them right away." "Excellent." Charles slung his suitcase over his shoulder and adjusted the Qinglong fruit under his other arm. "I have other matters to attend to. I'll leave everything in your capable hands." With that, he turned and hurried down the hallway, leaving Monica alone with the curious devil fruits, and a nagging sense that whatever Charles had planned next would be as unorthodox as ever. "All right, I'll go on ahead." Charles tucked a plump Congo lion fruit under one arm and a stalk of green dragon fruit under the other, forcing a casual smile. The way the maid had looked at him, so knowing, left him feeling startlingly exposed. Like a wary rabbit that never grazes too close to its own burrow, he preferred to keep to the edges, a habit that doubtless drove his attendants to distraction. He slipped into the grand hall. The aftermath of last night's banquet lay undisturbed. Empty goblets on tables, half-eaten platters, and guests still sprawled in slumber. Scanning the room for Barrett, he spotted a young maid sweeping near the dais. "Excuse me," he called softly. "Have you seen Captain Barrett this morning?" The maid straightened, her cheeks flushing as she met his gaze with eager eyes. Charles, suddenly embarrassed by her enthusiastic attention, averted his eyes. "Thank you. Carry on, please," he mumbled, darting away. If he stayed any longer, he was certain they'd all swarm him again. Muttering, "These maidens will bury me if I linger," he hurried down a cool, silent corridor. After turning a few corners, he stopped before an ornate door with a burnished nameplate. Charles recognized it at once, Caesar's quarters. Charles pushed open the door and found Caesar fast asleep on the bed, his brow furrowed as he strode forward. "Caesar," he called sharply. The first shout went unnoticed. He tried again, louder. "Caesar." Still no response. Heart-pounding, Charles let out a shrill cry. "Caesar, wake up!" With a sudden gasp, Caesar shot upright and tumbled off the mattress. He blinked wildly, his pulse hammering in his ears as if he'd just leaped from a great height. "Dad," he stammered, eyes wide with confusion. Charles folded his arms and stared down at his son. "What's wrong? You didn't recognize your own Ather?" "No, no." Caesar scrambled to his feet, brushing tangled hair from his forehead. "Of course I did. You're my dear father." He practically leapt to attention, fear flickering in his expression. "You're 15 years old," Charles chided, his voice stern but not unkind. "You still sleeping in until noon like you're 10. Get dressed, right now." "Yes, sir," Caesar saluted awkwardly, then hurried to pull on his shirt and trousers. In moments he stood by the bed, neatly attired and trembling slightly, as he waited for his father to continue. Charles sat on the edge of the mattress, studying his son. After a tense moment, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, polished wooden box. He set it gently on Caesar's bedside table and lifted the lid, revealing whatever surprise lay inside. Charles lifted the lid and discovered a pink devil fruit resting peacefully inside. Chapter 226, Caesar's Green Dragon Fruit. Beasts, phantasmal creatures, azure dragon, this is my father's treasure. Eat it. Charles pressed the green devil fruit into Caesar's hands. Caesar stared at it, stunned. As Charles's protege, he knew exactly what it was. A phantom beast devil fruit, rarer and more prized even than the natural Zoan varieties. To see one in Charles's possession left him in speechless awe. If he ever learned that Charles owned more than one of these fruits, he would probably combust with surprise. Charles caught Caesar's slack-jawed expression and couldn't hide his pride. "Go on," he urged. "What are you waiting for?" Caesar forced himself to meet Charles's gaze. Grateful, and more than a little intimidated, he lifted the fruit, inspected its rippling emerald skin, then closed his eyes, clenched his jaw, and bit down. Ah! The instant the flesh of the fruit hit his tongue, Caesar's face twisted in horror. It tasted like rotten eggs soaked in sewer scum. He retched, every instinct screaming to spit it out. "Stop! Stop!" he croaked, shoving the fruit away and doubling over with nausea. Charles watched, eyebrows raised. At least now he knew Caesar was truly unprepared for what a devil fruit really tastes like, and that this phantom beast fruit, despite its legendary status, was no gourmet delight. Charles's voice rang out, urgent and commanding. "Eat it all. Only then will the fruit's full power be unleashed." He didn't believe a word of it. He simply wanted to see his notoriously lazy son tackle something massive in one bite. Caesar glared at his father, clenched his teeth against his nausea, and bit down on the enormous fruit. The flesh crushed beneath his jaws in a single, reluctant gulp. His cheeks flushed scarlet, sweat beaded on his forehead. Still, he forced it down. No sooner had he swallowed than his body began to balloon, sleeves tearing and buttons popping free. Charles watched impassively, ready for the moment. With effortless strength, he seized Caesar under the arms, hauled him to the open window, and flung him outward. Below, the courtyard was suddenly thrown into chaos. A deafening crack echoed as Caesar's oversized form slammed into the stone paving, kicking up a mountain of dust. Shouts of alarm roared through the castle. Guards, roused from their rest, raced from the great hall with weapons drawn. But Charles remained at the window, arms folded, watching the swirling plume of dust. A faint, satisfied smile touched his lips. Smoke curled away, revealing a massive pink dragon sprawled across the courtyard floor. Its head throbbed as loose stones rattled down from the battlements above. Blinking in confusion, the dragon looked up to see a line of armed men, spears and swords at the ready, marching from the castle gate. Up in the tower, Charles pressed himself against the window ledge. Without hesitation, he vaulted outward into the open air. He dropped nearly 50 feet, twisting to land in a crouch that sent a sharp ache through his ribs. The courtyard went silent. Soldiers snapped to attention and stared up in astonishment. A moment later, Charles's form appeared in the window above, and he dove clear, landing in the center of the courtyard with the grace and confidence of a seasoned warrior. "Captain!" the men cried, relief and awe mingling in their voices. Charles rose, brushing dust from his tunic. He lifted a hand, and every blade came to rest. "Sheath your swords. There's no enemy here," he announced. The clatter of steel sliding back into scabbards told him they trusted his word. He gave them a reassuring nod before turning his gaze to the colossal dragon before him, his father, Caesar. Charles pressed a hand to his side. The fall had left him breathless and bruised. "Father," he called, voice echoing under the open sky. "Why did you toss me out of the tower like that?" Caesar's great eyes narrowed. A rumble built deep in his throat and coalesced into a glowing orb of flame. With a roar that shook the stone walls, he unleashed it, fire arcing through the eye, straight toward Charles. Charles's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected his son to be this reckless. But it was too late to dodge now. If he moved aside, the people behind him would be caught in the flames. Summoning his armament Haki, Charles coated himself completely, even channeling it through his expensive coat to avoid singing the fabric. The dragon's fire shot toward him, but all he felt was a faint smell of smoke. "Bold move, boy," Charles sneered. "How dare you challenge your father?" Caesar, the pink dragon, didn't even realize he'd exhaled a torrent of flame. Suddenly, a vast green-black fist, Haki amplified to immense size, loomed before him. With a thunderous crack, it connected. "Arg! That hurts!" Caesar bawled, a huge bump swelling atop his scaly head. The 10-meter-long beast thrashed and rolled across the castle's front garden, uprooting hedges and shattering fountains in its convulsions. "Captain, what is that?" Paul hurried forward, staring at the beleaguered dragon. Charles dusted imaginary soot from his coat and answered, "That's my son, Caesar. I recently introduced him to a zoan-type devil fruit, still working on control." He watched Caesar writhe and whine on the lawn. "He's powerful, but raw, untrained. Give me time. I'll have him mastering his transformation soon enough." "Master Caesar?" The question rippled through the courtyard as everyone turned to look at him. The commotion had drawn a crowd. Servants and guards alike spilled from the castle doors, their eyes fixed on the small pink dragon tossing and rolling on the lawn. "Captain, have we been invaded?" one sentry called, raising his spear. A squad of guards advanced in formation, weapons at the ready, trained squarely on the dragon. Charles shook his head emphatically, but said nothing. Before he could speak, Paul, well acquainted with Charles's reticence, stepped forward and intercepted the approaching guards. "Relax," Paul announced. "It's Master Caesar. He ate a devil fruit and can't control the transformation. That dragon is just him." Relief washed over the guards as they lowered their arms, though curiosity gleamed in their eyes. They watched the pink creature intently, its tiny wings, its serpentine tail, and the brief burst of flame it had just expelled left no doubt in their minds. This had to be a beast-type devil fruit, most likely from the rare phantom beast, or mythical zoan category. The spectators, most of whom had never seen the world beyond their own villages, watched with equal parts surprise and envy as the pink dragon tumbled end over end across the garden. "Ow!" Caesar yelped. After a few more somersaults, he flinched, his scaly hide rippling as he shrank back down into human form. In moments, he lay on the grass, curled into a ball barely 4.5 feet tall, hands clutched over his head, tears brimming in his eyes as he stared up at Charles. Charles rolled his eyes. A punch might smart, but curling up like that was ridiculous, especially with an audience. "Enough crying. Get up. It's not the end of the world to take a tumble in front of people." He yanked Caesar to his feet by the scruff of the collar. "But it really hurts," Caesar wailed, rubbing his head where a purple bruise was already blossoming. Charles pretended not to notice the swelling. "Listen, the devil fruit I gave you isn't some ordinary fruit. It's an artificial devil fruit, a prototype engineered by Dr. Vegapunk himself. You need to get a feel for its powers. No slacking off. I didn't hand you a top-tier fruit so you could whine and hide." Brushing dust from Caesar's coat, Charles stood back. Caesar nodded vigorously, though from the blank look in his eyes it was clear he'd only caught half of what Charles had said, namely, that his devil fruit was a man-made creation by Vegapunk. As for the warning not to be lazy, Charles simply ignored it. Chapter 227, Caesar Curant's Question. From the look on Caesar Curant's face, Charles immediately understood what was running through the captain's mind, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't watch Caesar every second. It was up to his captain's own judgment now. Early that morning, the laboratory deck was alive with excitement. Nearly every member of the Rockefeller Pirates had gathered around when a crewmate shouted, "Captain, is that an artificial devil fruit from Vegapunk?" Caesar, who had arrived ahead of the others, strode forward to inspect the device. He'd always dismissed Vegapunk's manufactured fruits as failures. Vegapunk himself had admitted as much. Yet here, displayed under the bright lamps, sat a lustrous green dragon devil fruit that looked every bit genuine. Charles met Caesar's gaze and said plainly, "See for yourself." Vegapunk lied. This artificial devil fruit actually works. For a moment, Caesar stared in stunned silence. Then a wide grin spread across his face, and his eyes lit up with exhilaration. "If this fruit truly is viable," he breathed, "then humanity's dream of creating devil fruits could finally become reality." Charles leaned forward, curiosity shining in his eyes. He'd long been fascinated by the mechanics of devil fruits, especially the artificial those fruits Caesar Clown had once mass-produced for Doflamingo and peddled to Kaido. If Caesar wanted to refine that process, Charles was eager to back him. "What, you want to research this too?" Charles asked, veiling his excitement. Caesar's grin was almost boyish. "I do. I want to perfect the formula, for real this time." Perfect timing, Charles thought. During his abrupt takeover of Punk Hazard, he'd spirited away nearly all of Dr. Vegapunk's experimental data and equipment, leaving the good doctor himself behind. Now, every bit of that priceless research sat in Charles's hands. To safeguard and organize it, Charles had built a dedicated database, an open vault for any future scientist to consult. Over the years, he'd recruited more than 40 top researchers from Punk Hazard, offering them generous funding and complete freedom on Kame Island. Word spread fast, and soon lab coats from every corner of the Grand Line swarmed the island's facilities. Today, Charles commanded a formidable scientific corps, innovators wholly devoted to pushing the boundaries of devil fruit science. And now, with Caesar itching to dive back into the lab, a new chapter was about to begin. Charles never had to worry when inspiration struck. Whenever he dreamed up a new device, he simply commissioned Kame Island's finest engineers to build it for him. Thanks to that arrangement, Charles enjoyed unrivaled convenience, and his inventions quickly became the talk of the island. Confident in the scientist's abilities, he turned to Caesar Courant with a broad smile. "If you want to research artificial devil fruits, feel free to explore my database anytime, and if you actually manage to create one, I'll make sure you have every resource you need." At those words, Caesar's eyes gleamed with excitement. He had coveted access to Charles's database for years, but the boy had guarded it so closely that only he could grant entry. In all that time, Caesar had snuck in only twice. Within its digital vault lay astonishing experimental records, gargantuan-scale projects, human cloning trials, transhuman combat squads, the list went on. Now, with Charles's blessing, Caesar planned to lose himself in those files for days. Even Vinsmoke Gage, standing beside him, couldn't hide his envy. Charles barely spared him a glance before turning back to the shipyard. Vinsmoke Gage certainly wasn't on his side. He'd only promised to free Charles once the vessel was complete. So far, all Charles had managed was a boat that could hover, and flying it safely was another matter entirely. Yet Charles felt no need to push Gage. He'd heard rumors of advanced aerial technology hidden on a nearby deserted island. Once he retrieved that mechanism, Gage would have no excuse but to build the true flying ship he'd agreed to deliver. He slipped his hand into his pocket and drew out the last devil fruit in his possession. "Caesar Courant," he called to his chief scientist. "Want a treat? This is a cat fruit, model, Congo lion, top quality." Charles set the spotted, feline-shaped fruit on the workbench before Caesar. The scientist picked it up, inspecting every curve and swirl of its rind. For a moment, his eyes sparkled with undisguised excitement. Then he masked it with professional calm. "Animal-type devil fruits aren't really my specialty for personal use," Caesar noted, examining the fruit more carefully, "but it'll be perfect for my experiments." "Suit yourself," Charles replied with a nod. "Consider it your reward for all your hard work. Now get back to cracking those flight equations. I want this ship airborne as soon as possible." Charles gave Caesar Courant a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Caesar. Someday, I'll find you a devil fruit that's perfect for you." He wasn't just making empty promises. From everything he'd collected so far, none of the devil fruits he'd come across really complemented Caesar's technological genius. But Charles had his eye on a rare specimen, the tauntaun fruit from the Drum Kingdom. Its power to generate and animate machinery, what the locals call the factory fruit, would be tailor-made for an inventor like Caesar. If it's still somewhere on Drum Island, Charles vowed he'd track it down. Caesar's face lit up in a rosy grin. "Thank you, Captain," he exclaimed, too excited to suppress his blush. He was young, just a teenager, and brimming with dreams. From the corner of the deck, Vinsmoke Gage watched the two of them and shook his head with a wry smile. "You two and your big plans," he murmured, but there was warmth in his tone. "Just don't get yourselves into trouble before I can retire. As long as you can invent something that benefits me or the Rockefeller pirates, I'll help you rebuild the Germa 66 kingdom." Charles turned to Vinsmoke Gage, who was standing at his side. The moment Gage heard Germa 66, his eyes lit up. This was exactly what he had been dreaming of. "Mr. Charles," he exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. Charles allowed himself a small, knowing smile. He had long since mastered the art of reading others' thoughts, an ability he'd cultivated in secret for over a decade. No one, not even his closest confidants, suspected that he could plumb the depths of their minds. Such knowledge was far too dangerous to reveal. The mere idea of being mentally transparent sent a chill down anyone's spine. "Very well," Charles said, shifting his tone to command attention. "Let's move out. And Caesar," he paused, letting the name hang in the air, "I'll be personally overseeing your training today." Caesar's face paled instantly. He'd known this moment would come, and he understood full well that being singled out by Charles never boded well. Today, certainly, would not be his day. Over the next few days, Charles devoted himself to improving Caesar's physique and honing his physical skills. He'd concluded that his son simply had no natural talent. Chapter 228, Negotiations. Charles, as the eldest son of the world's greatest swordsman, ought to have been a natural with the blade, yet he had no gift for swordsmanship whatsoever. His father half-joked that the boy couldn't possibly be his until a glance at Charles's eyebrows, so uncannily like his own, banished any doubt. Though Charles lacked the family's legendary sword talent, he more than made up for it with a powerful physique and a sharp understanding of martial techniques. That alone brought his father genuine relief. As firstborn, Charles would one day inherit the Rockefeller name and its responsibilities. If he'd proven utterly useless, questions of lineage might have lingered. Fortunately, the sword legacy was hardly in jeopardy. Charles's younger sister, Esdeth, was already the very image of her father's prowess. At just 8 years old, her one-handed swordplay had shone brilliantly during the recent naval engagement, earning even the sternest general's admiration. The only minor blot on their celebration came afterward, when the ice-cold fruit Esdeth had devoured left her with a splitting headache, and her father could only shake his head at the little swordswoman's stubbornness. I blamed myself for what happened earlier. After I tossed the fruit onto the bed, Esdesi had only managed a single, tentative bite. It wasn't that the fruit lacked potency, quite the opposite, but given our current circumstances, it might as well have been nothing. A few days slipped by in training, I drilling Esdesi and Caesar in swordplay, tactics, and endurance from dawn until dusk. The world beyond the castle walls lay hushed beneath a fresh blanket of snow. This afternoon, I stepped into the courtyard alone, drawing my sword. Tiny flakes drifted down, swirling and clinging to the steel as I practiced my form, a rising arc, a downward slash, a spinning parry. Each motion was precise, disciplined. When I finished, I sheathed the blade and stood perfectly still, letting the snow settle around me. Without warning, a crackling tension snapped through the air, a hidden force coiling about me. I steadied my breath and called out, voice low and firm, "Show yourselves." In the hush that followed, two figures emerged from behind the trees, masks concealing their faces, one jet black, the other ivory. They stopped some 50 meters away, keeping their distance. The taller of the two tilted his head, amusement in his posture. "Heh!" he sneered, voice echoing across the courtyard. "Your world government is bold indeed, sending someone all the way out here to confront us." "It seems you still don't take me seriously," Charles said quietly, a cold edge to his voice. In a single, fluid motion, he flicked his wrist, steel whistled through the air. A strange crimson and emerald light danced in his eyes, pure, undisguised, killing intent. The two CP0 agents facing him exchanged nervous glances, and each swallowed hard. Sent by the 5 elders of the world government, they'd been charged with restoring order to the 8 kingdoms of the New World. But when they arrived, all they found were smoking ruins. Every noble king had been executed by Douglas Barrett, the Devil's heir, and pirate crews now occupied the vacant thrones. Immediately, the agents had radioed their report back to the Gorosei. The five elders had erupted in fury, but it was too late. Their carefully laid plans to rally the kingdoms against a growing threat had gone up in flames. Worse still, the world government's reputation lay in tatters. Though the 8 kingdoms were not formal members, they remained sovereign realms under the mantle of the world government's protection, and their annihilation opened the organization to ridicule. One agent's hand trembled as he raised a coded badge. "Stand down, Charles. By order of the 5 elders, you will sheath that blade and surrender at once." Charles let out a mirthless laugh, the sword still poised for blood. "The 5 elders? They sent you too late. I don't need their orders to carve my own path." In that charged silence, the 2 operatives realized their fatal error. They had underestimated the boy before them. Charles, the lone force rewriting the fate of the new world, with nothing more than his will and his sword. Charles narrowed his eyes as the tension in the room crackled like a thunderstorm about to break. Around him, the world government's naval brass hovered uneasily, uncertain whether to move forward or retreat. "If we let this slide, after the pirates destroyed their fleet, there's going to be hell to pay," one admiral muttered to his colleague. But is it enough to provoke Charles into open war? Even if the Navy could push into the New World now, assuming wartime doesn't bar them, it wouldn't guarantee victory. Where are those 2 white-bearded golden lions you were supposed to have secured? The admiral's voice dropped. Currently, the New World is tearing itself apart in internecine conflict. If the Navy dared to step in, the local powers would slaughter them on sight. The Marines are outmatched. The world government has no choice but to send in its own negotiators. No swords drawn, just words. "Mr. Charles," a crisp voice rang out. One of the world government agents strode forward, his face hidden behind a stark white mask. "We have come to negotiate with you on behalf of the world government." Charles shifted as if weight had suddenly lifted from his shoulders. The domineering aura he'd projected moments before dissipated, replaced by easy amusement. He gave the masked emissary a slow, ironic smile. "Negotiate?" he asked, voice low and dry. "Why would I do that? I'm a pirate." The agent's eyes flickered behind the mask. He raised a gloved hand to silence a colleague who was about to speak. "No, Mr. Charles," he replied firmly. "This isn't a request." The 2 masked agents hovered just beyond the wreckage's edge, their gazes fixed on Charles. The taller figure, black mask gleaming, spoke first. "As far as the world government is concerned, you've left us no choice but to declare you a pirate. We've come to negotiate terms." Charles folded his arms, curiosity lighting his eyes. "Is that so? Pray tell, what exactly do you have in mind?" The shorter agent, clad in white, tilted his head. "Your recent conquests, the 8 kingdoms you seized in a single campaign." Charles allowed himself a dry chuckle. 8 kingdoms? None of them even fall under world government protection. "Jurisdiction or not," the black-masked agent replied, voice firm, "we cannot ignore your aggression. Absorbing 8 sovereign nations at once threatens the balance of power. The world government demands you withdraw immediately." "Withdraw?" Charles arched an eyebrow. "You expect me to simply hand back territories I won by force?" The agent in white advanced a step. "Precisely. Surrender control of those lands. End your occupation. No compromises." Before Charles could answer, the air split with a jagged burst of emerald light. A massive green slash barreled straight for them. "Incoming. Brace yourselves," the white-masked agent shouted. In perfect sync, both agents thrust their hands forward. A shimmering barrier sprang to life, its surface crackling as it met the several-meter-long beam of destructive energy head-on. Boom! The concussive blast shook the ground, sending a cloud of dust and debris swirling between them. Charles steadied himself, eyes locked on his adversaries, and the negotiation turned, in an instant, into outright confrontation. Snow swirled around the shattered treetops as 2 figures hurtled through the air like kites snapped from their strings. They tore through a dozen pines before they finally slammed to a halt, bodies crumpling into the drifts. Both spat up blood, breaths ragged. "Heh!" one wheezed, struggling to push himself upright. He wore a black mask, now cracked and stained with crimson. You dare come to my Kame Island and demand I return the 8 kingdoms? Have you no shame? Drink that in, added his partner, the white-masked agent clutching his side where blood seeped through his fingers. You return hem, or you'll pay for this disrespect. A sudden green glow sliced through the snowfall. In an instant, Charles appeared between the two men, the 7-star sword in his hand humming with eerie light. His dark coat billowed in the wind, snowflakes clinging to the blade's flickering runes. Mr. Charles, the white-masked agent gasped, raising his sword weakly. We came here in good faith. Abandon your claim on the 8 kingdoms, and the world government will compensate you. Charles's eyes flicked from one bloodied face to the other. Ice crunched under his boots. That compensation better be rich, he said softly, the 7-star sword's green aura pulsing with each word. The black-masked man spat blood and managed a bitter laugh. You're a pirate now, Charles. Rallying armies, annexing kingdoms. This world government will never tolerate it. Kill us both, and you'll sever any chance of peace forever. Charles's grip tightened on the hilt. The wind stung his cheeks, and the sword's glow painted long shadows in the snow. He raised the blade, and green light danced across the rugged landscape of Kame Island. Then let us see if the world government dares enforce its will upon me, he whispered, and with a single graceful movement, the 7-star sword sang through the air. When the time comes, the world government's retaliation will be absolutely merciless. The 2 masked agents, one wearing a blood-red mask, the other a pale white, echoed each other in ominous unison. But Charles didn't flinch. How could he simply abandon the territory he had fought so hard to claim? Hand it over to the world government without a fight? If the other pirates caught wind of any hesitation, they'd assume Charles was terrified of the world's most powerful authority, and that was a reputation he refused to earn. Chapter 229, Compensation. Charles froze his sword in midair, the blade hovering just above the chest of the black-masked CP0 agent. The 2 operatives, one in black mask, one in white, stared back at him, their earlier confidence shattered by the savage blow Charles had just delivered. What? Any last words? The black-masked agent rasped. Charles regarded them coolly. Both were already badly wounded, and here on his home turf, there would be no miracle rescue squad charging in at the 11th hour. He simply said, "Go on." The white-masked agent swallowed hard, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Mr. Charles, we're genuine in our offer. If you permit a peaceful evacuation of these islands, the world government will compensate you for everything." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Compensate me? With what?" "Devil fruits," the agent blurted out, urgency creeping into his tone. "We can grant you any devil fruit you choose to make up for your losses." At the mention of devil fruits, Charles's interest flared. He lowered his sword just enough to lean forward. "Devil fruits? How many are we talking about, and what types?" Everyone who knows Charles is familiar with his 2 great passions, rescuing beautiful women in peril and collecting rare devil fruits. So when the world government offered to pay for its own expansion with, of all things, devil fruits, Charles's curiosity was instantly piqued. From the shadows stepped 2 CP0 agents, their faces hidden behind white masks. One of them spoke, voice low and steady. 8 devil fruits, 1 from each kingdom. If those 8 monarchs will renounce their thrones, the world government will hand over the fruits without question. Charles's sword slipped slightly in his grip as he repeated the number aloud. 8. It wasn't a trivial request. Over the years, he had acquired 13 devil fruits from those very kingdoms. Each fruit was a royal heirloom, some in families for decades or even centuries. They weren't simply commodities, they were treasures. As he weighed the offer, Charles let his blade tip drop toward the ground, the cold steel reflecting the CP0 agents' impassive masks. He could seize the kingdoms himself. But was he willing to provoke a conflict on that scale? He stared at the agents, still silent, and silently asked himself which course of action would best serve his 2 greatest loves, adventure and the pursuit of legendary devil fruits. Charles Rockefeller stared at the navigation charts spread across his cabin table. The cluster of kingdoms he just subdued lay a good distance from his home base on Kame Island, and, unlike his own archipelago, they offered few natural resources. Although these isles sat near the entrance to the New World and the Totland Sea, They lacked the strategic and economic value of Charles's island chain. From the very start, he hadn't set out to conquer sovereign realms. He only wanted their resource-rich outposts. He never imagined his campaign would escalate into full-scale war. When Charles moved to claim the islands, their rulers, struggling under scarcity, had raised prices on essentials. In desperation, they forged an alliance with neighboring kingdoms and tried to drive off the Rockefeller pirates. It was the kind of provocation no one dared to offer the world's premier swordsman and one of the 4 legendary pirates of the New World. Their own greed had summoned this storm. Barrett, Charles's trusted first mate, mustered over 2,000 men and struck with brutal efficiency. One by one, 8 minor kingdoms fell, earning Charles the grim title, Destroyer of Nations. Yet victory brought its own problems. As governing these freshly conquered realms grows ever more demanding, Charles finds himself caught between the spoils of triumph and the headaches of administration. You can't just conquer a territory and then do nothing. The moment you seize it, you have to dispatch troops to garrison it, set up an administration, and appoint officers to run everything. If I tried to handle all those resource islands myself, I'd be tied down for months. Charles watched the Rockefeller pirates teeter under their own success. Devouring such a lucrative prize in one gulp had left the fleet bloated and overextended, just as his 2 advisors had warned. A pirate who brazenly snatches a kingdom instantly earns the wrath of every royal house in the world. No buccaneer in history has dared to usurp a throne as freshly claimed as that one. If you loot a realm and then sail away, the crowned heads will dismiss you as no more than a common pirate, and you'll never achieve anything truly grand. Even if you raise a kingdom to the ground, the other monarchs will only offer hollow condolences. But if you stay on, kill the rightful sovereign, and set yourself upon the throne, then you become nothing but a usurper. Later generations will remember you by one name alone, the Thief King. The tension in the air was nearly suffocating. In the world of One Piece, the balance of power rests on the world government and the patchwork of allied and independent nations. At this moment, 2 CPO agents, one wearing a stark black mask, the other a white one, stood before Charles, who was lost in deep thought. After a long, heavy silence, the black-masked agent finally broke in. "Mr. Charles, we've come all this way in good faith. We need your answer." But Charles didn't move. His eyes, distant and unfocused, betrayed nothing. The black-masked agent cleared his throat, pressing the point. "Please, sir." In the blink of an eye, Charles's wrist snapped back. His long sword appeared as if out of nowhere and sliced through space at a speed no ordinary eye could follow. A clean, invisible arc cut across both agents' shoulders. "Ah!" The black-masked agent's scream echoed through the courtyard. He fell to his knees, clutching where his left arm used to be, blood spilling like a dark waterfall. His companion, the white-masked agent, staggered back, eyes wide with horror. "No one thinks for me," Charles said, his voice icy and controlled. "I refuse to be bargained with or pressured." The chill in his tone caused the white-masked agent to tremble uncontrollably. He cast a furious glance at his fallen comrade, an unspoken curse on his own side for underestimating this young man. Charles sheathed his sword and turned to face the lone survivor. His expression was calm, but his words carried the weight of a declaration. "I can pull out of the 8 kingdoms, but in exchange, I want every island surrounding them, every last one." Silence fell again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the wounded agent. Charles's terms hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The game had changed. Once more, power had shifted in the blink of an eye. "Any objections?" "None at all," the masked CP0 agent replied without hesitation. In truth, this was a straightforward matter. The world government simply needed to preserve a royal family in those kingdoms to lend legitimacy to their actions. As long as a monarch remained, they could claim everything was above board. Charles leaned forward. "I do have one condition regarding the devil fruits. I need 8 in total. For the Zoan category, only ancient and mythical beast fruits, no standard zones. As for Paramecia and Logia types, I have no specific requirements." Behind the smooth, featureless mask, the agent stiffened. "Ancient and mythical zoans. Understood, Mr. Charles. I will submit your request to my superiors. Whether it can be granted depends entirely on their decision." He was wise not to promise on the spot. Charles's demand was too significant for a single CP0 operative to approve unilaterally. Charles's eyes narrowed. Very well. Then when can I expect their answer? A heavy silence settled over the sterile briefing room as the masked agent concealed his uncertainty and left Charles to wait for the verdict. Send over the devil fruit, Charles said coolly. I'll hand those islands over when I'm good and ready. He leaned back, unconcerned. There was no rush. Chapter 230, The Exchange. Charles's terms cut through the tension like a blade. I'll make the trade, he announced, but I won't settle for a run-of-the-mill zone devil fruit. I want an ancient model beast, nothing less. The white-masked CP0 agent froze for a heartbeat, then recovered his composure. Without a word to Charles, he unhooked a sleek communicator and pushed a series of buttons. A crackling line connected, and a calm, aged voice answered. Moses here. Has he agreed? The agent straightened. Sir Charles consents to the exchange, but he insists on an ancient-type zone rather than a standard animal fruit. A harsh curse crackled back. An ancient zone? A lion? Damn it! All we have left are maybe 8 of those in history. Handing one over would gut the world government's arsenal. The agent flushed, painfully aware that Charles was standing less than an arm's length away. Embarrassed by the veiled insult to his employer, he hesitated, until Charles reached out and snatched the communicator. This is Charles, he said coolly, voice crisp and unwavering. If you want to make this deal, bring me only the valuable fruits. I have no use for common fodder. Now, when and where do I get the lion model devil fruit? Silence stretched on the line, the air crackling with anticipation. At last, Moses's voice answered, a grudging respect edging into his tone. Understood. Prepare your team. You'll have your prize by dawn. Charles's demand rang out clear and sharp. When will you return those kingdoms? Satan, the ancient lord clad in black with a long scar running down one side of his face, froze in fury. You insolent brat. Are you really trying to bargain with the world government? His voice thundered through the void. A low, cruel chuckle followed. So it seems you dare to negotiate directly with me. Charles offered a calm, almost gentle smile. He waited, letting the silence stretch until he could hear Satan's ragged breathing, each exhale dripping with rage. Of all the elders of the world government, Satan ranked among the very highest authority, second only to lordom himself. Yet here Charles stood, unbowed, facing him head-on. Satan, Charles began, voice firm, there's no way I'll agree to surrender the 8 ancient species. You can keep your mythical beasts, just hand over the kingdoms you've seized. Satan's reply was a low growl. You're being ridiculous. Change your terms, or don't expect the world government to stay out of this. At that, the corners of Charles's mouth curved upward. These are my absolute conditions. I don't want your ordinary creatures. The 8 ancient species are the only stakes I care about. Beyond that, do as you will. He let his words hang in the heavy air. There would be no further compromise. The fate of the kingdoms and of those legendary beasts now rested on whether Satan would accept his ultimatum. Charles leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Remember, a natural-type devil fruit counts as 3 regular fruits toward your quota. Satan Sheng's jaw clenched. You, don't push your luck. Natural fruits are tightly controlled. The world government has grudgingly accepted your terms, and they'll deliver the fruit, but you'd better stay out of my affairs until then. And don't you dare let word of this deal get out. No one's interests are served if it leaks. He glared daggers at Charles. Fine. I won't tell anyone that pirates are doing business with the world government. Charles chuckled. Sure you won't, asshole. Humiliated beyond measure, Satan Sheng crushed the tiny bug transmitter beneath his boot. The 4 senior officers standing behind him exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, one sighed. All right, give him the 8 devil fruits he's owed. Maybe that'll shut him up. A blond man with a crescent-shaped birthmark on his forehead rose to his feet. 4 ancient types and 4 superhuman types. I'll select them myself. Heads nodded around the room as preparations began, the fate of those 8 forbidden fruits hanging in the balance. Charles listened to the steady beep of the busy signal echoing through the snowy courtyard and shook his head in resignation. He lowered the phone and glanced at the 2 figures cowering before him. At the sight of his calm, unreadable expression, both men broke into a cold sweat. "Forget it. Let's go," one of them stammered. Charles said nothing more. He simply nodded, and the pair scrambled to their feet. Thank you, they blurted, bowing repeatedly before scurrying away. Over by the broken fountain, two members of CP0, recognizable by their masks and the celestial dragon sigil stitched into their uniforms, watched the scene with obvious delight. The agent in the white mask leaned on his partner, who was clutching a severed arm like a grotesque trophy, trembling all the while. Even as these world government agents reveled in the spectacle of a pirate showing mercy, Charles merely surveyed the scattered debris, sighed, and went back to his sword practice. There were still a few days before he would return to the castle, and he intended to use every moment to hone his skills. 3 days later, a man in dark sunglasses appeared at Charles's door. He bowed deeply and held out an ornately carved wooden box. "Mr. Charles, as promised, your trade fruit," he announced. Charles opened the lid to reveal 8 devil fruits, each etched with its unique, swirling pattern. A satisfied smile spread across his face. "Perfect," he said. "I accept your terms. In return, I'll order my men to withdraw from those kingdoms immediately." The messenger inclined his head in acknowledgement and slipped away without another word. Charles watched him go, then called after him, "Hey, Barrett!" He waited, already plotting his next move as the snow drifted silently around him. Charles tapped the Den Mushi resting on his desk. "Recall our forces from those 8 kingdoms. We only need control of those islands." Barrett's voice crackled back in agreement. He never hesitated to carry out Charles's orders. Hanging up, Charles gathered the 8 newly acquired devil fruits and climbed the stairs to his study. Laying them out one by one, he frowned at the smooth skins. None bore the usual nameplates or government seals. It was obvious they'd been stripped of their identities, likely a deliberate move to frustrate anyone who got their hands on them. Charles, however, had something better than stickers, his devil fruit encyclopedia. Opening its weathered pages, he matched each fruit's shape, color, and texture against the detailed illustrations. It took half an hour of careful comparison, but once he confirmed their true names, a broad grin spread across his face. The initial unease, wondering if he'd somehow picked up duds or worse, melted away. These fruits weren't world-shattering in power, but they were far from worthless. They fell into no common category, yet each promised a unique ability. 2 shaped like bananas, 1 like a pear, 3 like cantaloupes, and 2 like apples. Charles set down his book, satisfied. His collection had just grown richer and more unpredictable by 8. Charles surveyed the 8 devil fruits laid out before him. 1. The zoology department's snake fruit, granting the power to transform into a titanoboa. 2. The animal department's cat fruit, saber-toothed tiger model. 3. The dragon fruit's eudomorphodon form. 4. The zoology department's bird fruit, which turns its user into an Archaeopteryx. 5. The Superman paper fruit. 6. The Superman jacket fruit. 7. The fruit of thorns. 8. Several other rare specimens from the Superman series. Aside from a slight reservation about the bulky design of the jacket fruit, each one seemed perfectly suited to Charles's ambitions. But it was the ancient fruits that truly stunned him. Their seeds pulsed with power far beyond anything he'd ever imagined, and yet not a single one had been weakened. He had half expected the world government to meddle with these treasures, to render them useless, or leave a nasty surprise for whoever dare to try them. Rumor had it they delighted in such deceptions. Instead, every devil fruit before him was intact, its power undiminished. A wave of embarrassment washed over Charles. He'd clearly overestimated their treachery. In truth, the only reason for the delay was the caution of the 5 old stars, those senior figures who'd paused long enough to watch his every move. Fearful of what Charles might do, they stalled him, but in the end, they'd left each devil fruit unaltered. Charles carefully stored all the devil fruits in a reinforced safe, planning to hand them over to his children once they'd grown up. As a devoted father, he had already laid the groundwork for their future. Chapter 231, The Swordsman Group. The calendar flipped to 1490 in the Haiyuan reckoning, and just like that, another year had passed. Since arranging that deal with the world government at the start of the year, Charles hadn't ventured outside once. He'd practically become a full-blown otaku. All the same, there was one piece of news that had him grinning from ear to ear. Elena was pregnant again, this time with sextuplets, 6 babies at once. It was the kind of fortune that made any father beam with pride. While Charles indulged in his hobby, the Rockefeller pirates were hard at work consolidating their newly claimed islands. Those isles teemed with rich mineral deposits, and ore shipments poured into Kame Island around the clock. Construction surged forward, though the rapid pace created a severe labor shortage. To meet the demand, the pirates now patrolled the seas daily under Rockefeller orders. They attacked enemy vessels and captured rival pirates, turning them into forced labor for the island's development. Whenever a mission turned particularly dangerous, Barrett would take it upon himself to lead the charge. By year's end, the Rockefeller crew had swelled to 4,000, twice their former strength. With each new shipment of minerals, Kame Island's coffers swelled, and its tax revenues climbed higher than ever before. With just 1 month's tax revenue, Charles could feed an army of 4,000 men. Yes, an army. Though he still sailed under the black flag of a pirate, in secret he was laying the foundations of a kingdom. He had begun to discipline and train his crews as if they were royal troops, and every subordinate in his ranks was a carefully chosen talent. Most of these men had pledged themselves to Charles out of admiration for his reputation, the world's finest swordsman, and for the promise of standing beside such an extraordinary captain. The rest had been torn from their homes by the slave trade at sea. Over recent years, Charles rescued them during raids around Kame Island, and those who survived the brutality of the slave markets threw in their lot with the Rockefeller pirates. Today, they form the backbone of his fighting force. Charles's approach stood in stark contrast to that of the Golden Lion Shiki. Shiki would enlist anyone who bore the label pirate, amassing a horde without concern for loyalty or skill. His flying pirates, freed from the Navy's tightening grip, multiplied like a runaway stallion, rapid, unstoppable, and ferocious. Under Shiki's banner, 13 captains now sail the New World waters, each a notorious criminal with bounties reaching into the hundreds of millions. Yet despite Shiki's numbers and fame, Charles's vision of a true, disciplined kingdom at sea was growing ever stronger and more formidable with every passing day. Over the past 2 years, Charles's influence has steadily spread through the heart of the New World, edging ever closer to the Lingling Sea, territory long dominated by the Charlotte family. Curiously, even though their spheres of power now almost touch, neither side has provoked a single skirmish. Meanwhile, the Whitebeard pirates have skyrocketed in strength, recruiting countless adopted sons and allied crews as they press deeper into the latter half of the New World. At the same time, Charles's own fleet broke past the 4,000 fighter mark, a milestone that earned him formal entry into the exclusive 4,000 Pirate Club. To put that in perspective, only 3 captains currently field more than 4,000 combatants: Shiki the Golden Lion, John the Straight Silver Axe, famed keeper of the Rock's treasure, and Edward Newgate, the Whitebeard himself. No other commander even comes close. Charles stands next in line with exactly 4,000 sworn fighters, all meticulously organized under his trusted deputy, Captain Fan. Beyond his core troops and a personal retinue of 400 to 500 made bodyguards, Charles has spent the last year handpicking the most promising young pirates from various crews, folding them into his own elite Endi. Charles surveyed the assembled ranks, 500 swordsmen standing in perfect formation, each blade polished to a mirror finish. At their fore were 5 swordmasters, legendary for unleashing flying slashes that could cleave a ship's rigging in 2. This was the elite cadre of the Rockefeller pirates, the deadliest swordsmen on the seas, handpicked by Charles himself. Over the past 2 to 3 years, these 5 had trained relentlessly under Charles's exacting standards, rising from ordinary swordsman to the coveted rank of swordmaster. Such a promotion was a 1-in-a-million achievement, one that drew envy from every cutthroat in the fleet. Their names had become pirate lore: Dick Roy, the unyielding duelist; Brian Turner, whose blade danced like lightning; Andy Nelson, master of the perfect counterthrust; Boris Hodge, famed for his ironclad defense; Elvis Lauer, whose past was as stormy as his reputation. Elvis Lauer's story was the most remarkable. Once a rear admiral who had forced Admiral Estes to surrender in a brutal naval engagement, he'd been captured by Imperial forces and condemned to a labor camp, until Estes herself freed him, unable to leave a worthy opponent to die in chains. Though grateful, Lauer carried a quiet disappointment. To his mind, that final battle had never truly been resolved. Despite his lingering pride, Lauer had no desire to face Estes again. He knew she was the eldest daughter of the Rockefeller family, and a victory over her would earn him no praise, only the ire of those vying for favor with the Rockefellers. So he remained loyal to Charles, blade ever at the ready, and content to stand among the finest swordsmen anywhere on the ocean. Everyone said that taking on Hades was straightforward enough, but it was those small wraiths, like Estes, that proved truly troublesome. Still, when Lowell learned that a victory would secure his father's freedom, he accepted the duel without hesitation. Nothing mattered more than regaining his family's liberty. The two combatants faced off again in the arena, and a sizable crowd gathered to watch, among them the ever-curious Charles, who seized any excuse for entertainment. From the opening bell, Estes dazzled the onlookers with her elaborate footwork and lightning-fast blade work. Her every feint and flourish was a masterpiece of swordplay. Yet through it all, not a single strike landed on Lowell. Calmly, he held his greatsword at the ready, alternating wide, defensive arcs with sudden, precise slashes. The sheer power behind each swing created an impenetrable barrier that kept Estes at bay. Frustration crept into her eyes as she realized her fancy tricks were useless against his steady guard. Finally, Estes lunged in a desperate gamble. In that instant of overcommitment, Lowell saw his opening. He countered with a deep, sweeping slash that sent her sword spinning from her hand and clattering to the sand. Disarmed and unbalanced, Estes could do nothing but concede. The match, and the promise it carried, was his. True to her word, Estes bowed her head and swore to set Lowell's father free. A hush fell over the crowd as the weight of her oath settled over the arena. Then, gathering his resolve, Lowell knelt on one knee before Charles, head bowed, and asked for his ally's pledge of fealty. Charles nearly choked on his melon at the sight of Lowell's perfectly executed kneel. He glanced at Estes, who simply nodded, and Charles understood. Lowell was pledging his loyalty. Reflecting on their recent duel, Charles recognized that, though Lowell's wide-swinging style had looked raw, it bore a distinctive skill and, more importantly, showed that Lowell had reached a bottleneck in his development. With the right guidance, he could shatter that limit and become a true swordsman. Enthusiastic to expand his ranks, Charles welcomed Lowell into the Rockefeller Pirates' circle of blade masters. Over the next few days, he worked closely with the new recruit, refining his footwork, honing his mental focus, and introducing him to advanced sword forms. Under Charles's tutelage, Lowell broke through to the sword hero realm in less than a month, earning his place among the pirates' ever-growing roster of legendary swordsmen. Lowell was now the second swordsman under Charles's direct command, Stanley being the first, and his example sparked fresh ambition in the others. By the year 1489 of the Hyuan calendar, several more recruits had followed suit, each ascending to the ranks of the sword hero. By 1490, the number of swordsmen under Charles's command had swelled to 8. In addition to his original 5 bladesmen, Isaac and Paul, who'd faithfully followed him for 8 or 9 years, had both just earned promotion to full swordsmen. Watching his veterans grow stronger by the day, Charles couldn't help but grin. Chapter 232. The peace was broken. As his crew grew stronger, Charles knew the time had come to launch his next grand design. His long-postponed circumnavigation, delayed 5 years, maybe 6, could wait no longer. According to the sea calendar, it was now April 1490, and today marked the triumphant debut of his pride and joy, the flagship he had spent nearly a decade building, the sea god Poseidon. At last, the colossal vessel was ready to carry him across unfamiliar seas. He had spent the past 15 years anchored in the New World, racing once, hurriedly, along the great route, but there remained countless uncharted wonders in this pirate-ridden expanse. From the frothing southern currents to the icy northern straits, every horizon held a new adventure. The exclusive Rockefeller Harbor at Kami was buzzing with activity. 300 maids, each laden with trunks and oars, boarded the Poseidon in neat, dutiful rows. Close behind them came the 500 swordsmen who had sworn their blades and loyalty to Charles. They'd trained together for years, and now they stood ready to follow their captain wherever the winds might take them. "Boss, you're really going through with it?" Carter, the ship's first mate, stepped forward, brows knit with a mixture of excitement and worry. He glanced up at the towering masts, the sails already unfurled in preparation. Charles turned from the rail, dark hair tousled by the salt breeze, and met Carter's gaze. A slow smile curved his lips, steadying any lingering doubts. "Yes," he said with quiet conviction. "Today we set sail. The world won't wait for us forever, and neither will we." With that, Charles raised his hand, signaling the harbor pilots. A horn sounded from the dock, ropes were cast off, and the Poseidon began to glide forward. The cheers of maids, soldiers, and dock workers rang across the water as the great ship slipped into open sea. Behind them, the fragile piece of Kami Harbor faded into the distance. Ahead lay the unknown, a vast canvas of ocean stretched out under the rising sun, waiting for Charles and his Rockefeller pirates to leave their mark. "I've always dreamed of sailing around the world, and now that our ship is finally finished, it's time to make that dream a reality." Charles stood on the dock, hands clasped behind his back, gazing up at the sleek 30-meter vessel. Its polished hull gleamed in the morning sun, every detail a testament to his hard work and the skill of his crew. "Charles, wait," Carter called softly, falling into step beside him. His concern was plain on his face. "Once you set sail, what will become of Kame Island? Who will keep the peace if you're gone?" Under Charles's leadership, the Rockefeller pirates had grown more powerful with each passing day. His legendary feat of calming the sea had earned them respect and fear across the islands. As long as he remained, no upstart would dare threaten their haven. But now that he planned to leave, Carter worried the balance of power might shift. Charles turned to him and offered a reassuring smile. "You're not the only leader here, Carter. I trust you completely. With you guiding Kame Island, I know it will flourish." Carter met his gaze. He'd been the first man to pledge his loyalty to Charles, a loyal native son who had stood by him through every storm. At Charles's words, Carter's tension eased, though his eyes still held a flicker of doubt. "Don't worry," Charles said firmly. "Everything will be all right." He patted Carter's shoulder, then straightened as if drawing strength from the ship behind him. "My journey begins now." With that, Charles turned toward the gangplank and took his first step aboard, leaving Carter and the future of Kame Island in hands he knew were more than capable. Charles stood on the pier and addressed the assembled officers with quiet confidence. "As long as I'm alive, no major pirate fleet will dare set foot on Kame Island. All you need to do is deal with any small-time troublemakers who underestimate their own strength. I believe in you." With that, he led Irina's 6 daughters aboard the flagship. Behind them came Estes' younger siblings and Caesar's, too. Every member of Charles's extended family was gathered for this voyage. Only a handful of trusted commanders remained ashore to safeguard Kami and the surrounding isles. That would be more than enough to handle any threat. "Hoist the sails! Let's get underway!" Charles called. Below decks, the navigators sprang into action, and the great engines rumbled to life. Outside, the propellers churned the water into froth. Standing on deck, Charles felt the ship's power humming through the planks beneath his boots, like electricity coursing through veins. At his signal, a deckhand unfurled the Rockefeller Jolly Roger, a stark skull impaled by a single saber. It was a banner that sent shivers through every pirate captain in the New World. With the tide behind them, the ship finally slipped free of Kame Island's harbor and set out on the boundless blue. News of Charles's reappearance raced through the intelligence networks of every major power at the speed of light. No one had expected him to emerge again after so long in seclusion. "Ha ha ha! So after hiding away for all this time, you finally decided to show your face?" roared the golden lion Shiji, his laughter booming through the flagship's command hall. He stood before a vast holomap, his golden mane catching the flicker of distant stars. For months he had kept Charles under close surveillance, partly because he still dreamed of recruiting the boy prodigy, and partly because he was on the brink of conquering the first half of the New World. Except for a handful of kingdoms along the Red Earth continent's edge, His territory there was now virtually unchallenged. But Shiji's ambitions did not end at the halfway mark. He hungered for the prosperous heart of the New World, the region every map labeled as Rockefeller Pirate Waters. Charles, by contrast, had only ventured overseas once in recent years and had shown no appetite for territorial conquest, choosing instead to stand guard over Kame Island. If the Golden Lion launched an assault on the Rockefeller Bastion now, the consequences would be disastrous, and almost certainly spark a naval conflict on the epic scale of the one fought 4 years ago. Golden Lion Shiji had always wavered, but the latest intelligence left him with no choice. Charles had abandoned the island, spiriting away his entire family and closest heirs, and left only a handful of captains to hold the fort. That reckless dream Charles had voiced 6 years ago, "I want to sail around the world with my family," suddenly felt less absurd and more like a declaration of war on Shiji's ambitions. A wry smile split Shiji's face. With Charles gone, Shiji could finally push into the New World unopposed, sidestepping any direct confrontation with his old rival. He rose from his throne-like chair and strode to the center of the great war hall. The torches along the walls cast flickering shadows over his golden mane of hair, an emblem of his nickname, the Golden Lion. The assembled captains and officers fell silent as he spoke, his deep voice echoing off stone pillars. "Prepare every fleet," he ordered. "Outfit each ship for a swift departure. We strike at dawn, no excuses, no delays. This is our moment." A thunderous cheer erupted. Men who had waited years for Shiji's green light exchanged eager grins and hurried away to relay the commands. Thousands of miles to the east, naval headquarters buzzed with equal urgency. Cyborg Kong leaned over a desk cluttered with maps and reports, his mechanical eyes scanning the latest communique. He tapped a gauntleted finger on the table. "Why has Charles abandoned the island so suddenly?" he demanded, calling for all senior officers to assemble in the strategy chamber. For 2 years, the Navy had kept its powder dry, its only notable action aimed at crushing the Roger pirates. Now, with Charles's motives shrouded in mystery and Shiji mobilizing a massive force, the seas were poised for a new and far more dangerous contest for supremacy. The Grand Navy has deployed its squadrons along the most crucial arteries of the Great Road, ready to strike at any pirates who venture onto the high seas. So far, open war has been avoided, but today the peace is on the brink of collapse. "I'm not entirely sure of his endgame," admitted Chief of Staff Crane, pacing before the holographic chart of the shipping lanes. "Our intelligence confirms that Charles has just completed the world's fastest ship. Given his history, it's almost certain he's preparing to set sail immediately." "Set sail," echoed Marshal Kong, his mechanical arm clinking against the table. "Where could he be heading now?" The New World has been rife with unrest over the past 2 years. The Golden Lion Shiji has carved out a protection racket in every port, while the fearsome Whitebeard roams the seas, searching for his lost son. Of the 3 great pirate crews, only the Rockefellers have maintained an uneasy truce, until now. With Charles about to enter the fray, even that fragile stability could shatter. Marshal Kong frowned, tapping a command into his console. "Dispatch a reconnaissance corvette at once. Have them shadow the Rockefeller pirates from a safe distance and report back on any movements. If Charles intends to join the hunt, or worse, to challenge them, we need eyes on the situation immediately." As the officers scrambled to carry out his orders, the fleet's steely readiness belied an unspoken anxiety. Once Charles's new vessel drops anchor on the horizon, the balance of power in the New World may shift forever. "Yes!" The generals echoed his command without hesitation. At Charles's signal, every fleet on the sea trembled with unease. Excitement clashed with apprehension, yet above all, there was a sense of bewilderment. None of it, however, touched Charles personally. The moment he had set sail, he had upended the fragile balance of the New World. The first to feel the shock were the pirates, those lawless wanderers of the open ocean, who had long been kept in check by the mere rumor of his name. Now, with Charles at the helm, their uneasy truce dissolved into chaos. Chapter 233. The sun hung high in the sky, setting the deck aglow with warmth. A gentle sea breeze ruffled the sails as Charles reclined in a rocking chair, savoring a cold glass of juice. All around him, The crew laughed and played, treating the voyage more like a holiday than a mission, albeit with the usual precautions still in place. Elena, now 7 months pregnant, settled beside him. Her rounded belly nudged his side as she plucked a grape from a nearby bowl, peeled it, and popped it into his mouth. "Charles," she teased, "we can't just drift forever, you know." He swallowed the burst of sweetness and gave her a lazy grin. "Where to next?" She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "First the New World," she said. "Then Fishman Island. And this time, I'm not planning to come back for years." Charles set his empty glass aside with a chuckle. "Sounds perfect. Don't worry about Kamai Island. I'll leave it to Carter and the others. They've got it covered." Elena's eyes softened. He took her hand, squeezing gently. "Honestly," he went on, "nothing on Kame matters more to me than you. As long as you and our child are safe, I wouldn't trade it for all the islands in the world." Her breath caught. She leaned into him and laid her head on his chest. "I'll always be right here with you," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, the ship creaking beneath them and the sea stretching out in every direction, a promise of adventure and the quiet comfort of home all at once. Charles gently stroked Elena's hair as they strolled along the sunlit deck, both of them weary from the curious and often judgmental glances of their fellow passengers. At last, Elena could take no more. She yanked her hand free and scurried toward the cabin, cheeks burning. Charles laughed heartily. "Look at you two, like an old married couple on their honeymoon. Why are you so shy?" His laughter rippled across the deck. Irina shot him a sharp look, then slipped past him into the cabin. Charles leaned back against the railing, eyes closed, and let the warm sunshine wash over him. The ship pressed steadily onward through the calm blue sea, time drifting by in lazy tranquility. Suddenly, a voice cut through the peaceful hum of the ship's engines. "Help! Is anyone there?" Charles's eyes snapped open. He sat upright, every instinct on high alert. His analytical mind, like a finely tuned computer, instantly parsed the deck's ambient noise and isolated that desperate cry. Tuning his personal communicator to the distress frequency, he traced the signal to a remote island beach. He had no interest in rescuing someone just because she was a woman. He would help simply because any life in danger deserved aid. Snatching up his communicator, he called out, "Hello, can you hear me? I'm coming to help." Charles shouted, "Turn the boat to 9 o'clock. Someone needs help over there." "Aye, Captain," replied the helmsman. In the control room, the crew adjusted the vessel's course until they were heading straight for a small island. On the shore stood a young woman in a kimono, blade in hand, her eyes flicking nervously between the forest edge and the churning sea. Around her, a pack of savage beasts, wolf-like creatures with matted fur and glowing eyes, closed in. "Help!" she screamed. A snarling wolf lunged forward, and she met it with a desperate swing of her samurai sword. The slash was clumsy, but it drove the closest beast back. Seizing the moment, she dashed away, threading between trees until she burst onto the sandy beach. Gasping, she pressed the sword's hilt against her chest and stared at the endless horizon. "Where am I?" she whispered. Her breath caught as a low growl echoed from the forest. She froze, sweat beading on her brow. The pack was still out there, and closing in fast. "Don't come any closer." The woman's frantic shout cut through the humid air, but the red-eyed wolf charging at her paid no heed. "Help!" she cried, scrambling backward as the beast lunged. Its powerful shoulder knocked her to the sand with a thud. Fear spiked in her chest. Then, in her outstretched palm, a pulse of emerald light flared. The wolf vanished in a crackling pop, gone as though it had never existed. She sat up with a gasp, brushing damp strands of green-tinted hair from her face. Her kimono was rumpled and torn, but she was unhurt. Was it teleported away? Relief washed over her. Thank goodness. Yet the island's loneliness closed in on her again as she rose and stared at the vast, empty sea. A deserted island offered no help, only silence and isolation. She sank back to the shore, despair settling over her once more. Then a dark speck appeared on the horizon. It grew steadily, resolving into the shape of a ship. Her heart leapt. A boat! A rescue! She sprang to her feet, waving frantically and shouting at the top of her lungs. "Over here! Please see me!" She stamped her feet and waved her arms until her shoulders ached, but none of the sailors on deck seemed to notice. All except one. High above on the ship's bow, Charles peered through a spyglass, scanning the rocky coastline. His sharp blue eyes caught the flash of emerald hair and the flutter of a silk kimono against the dull sand. Stranded on this forsaken island, only one person fit that description. His breath caught. He knew exactly who she was. Charles stood at the prow of his small cutter, marveling at the sight before him. On the shore, bathed in afternoon sunlight, danced a single woman, Kozuki Toki, the legendary time traveler from 8 centuries past. A wave of disbelief washed over him. What were the odds that he, a lone sailor on a routine supply run, would encounter the famed wife of Kozuki Oden herself? Toki, oblivious to his presence at first, spun and leapt across the sand with an almost childlike glee, arms outstretched to the sky. Charles couldn't help smiling. Her uninhibited joy was infectious, and for a moment the strangeness of it all felt like nothing more than a beautiful illusion. Then a shadow swept across the water behind him. Charles whirled around, and his smile vanished. A massive ship glided toward them, its dark hull looming like a moving fortress. Enormous, tightly furled sails caught what little wind there was, driving the vessel forward at an alarming pace. Atop the mainmast, a tattered black flag bore a grinning skull. Pirates. Heart-pounding, Charles gripped the rail. The cutter rocked slightly as the pirate ship closed the gap, its crew leaning over the rails to size him up. Charles forced himself to remain calm. "Hey there!" he called, projecting his voice to the nearest lookout. "Are you shipwrecked?" From the deck of the pirate vessel, a young sailor, a handsome fellow with sun-bleached hair and mischievous eyes, leaned forward, startled. But when he spotted Toki staggering on the island's edge, relief flickered across his features. Yes! Yes, we are!" Toki shouted back, scrambling toward the water. She waded in up to her knees, shielding her eyes against the sun as she took in the looming ship. Charles took a deep breath and slipped the boarding ladder over the gunwale. The young pirate gave him a grateful nod. "Come on up," the sailor called. "You'll be safer aboard." Toki reached the ladder and paused, her gaze shifting between the cutter bobbing behind her and the forbidding deck above. Her hand hovered over the lowest rung. Charles forced a light laugh. "Don't worry," he called. "They seem friendly enough, unless you're allergic to pirates." That drew a puzzled half-smile from Toki. Finally, she set her foot on the ladder's first rung. As she climbed, the cutter's wake churned behind her, and Charles exhaled in relief. Whatever lay ahead on this pirate ship, at least they were no longer stranded, and at least they were together. "Although we're pirates, we aren't monsters." Charles laughed, the sound echoing across the deck. "Just because we fly the Jolly Roger doesn't mean we're evil." Seeing Guangyue hesitate at the gangplank, he couldn't resist giving her a playful tap on the forehead. She took a steadying breath and stepped aboard, and immediately understood how enormous this ship truly was. Around her, maid-uniformed waitresses wove between barrels and tables, balancing trays of steaming food and crystal goblets. Nearby, scarred swordsmen lounged against the bulwarks, their blades still sheathed at their hips as they exchanged quiet words. In one corner of the deck, a cluster of laughing children wove through the crew's legs, their games momentarily pausing whenever a newcomer passed by. A rich, booming laugh cut through the bustle. "Ha! Welcome to the Rockefeller Pirates, miss." Turning, Guangyu found herself face to face with Charles, striding toward her with the gait of a man on the very top of the world. Her heart fluttered. Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles drew himself up proudly, hands on his hips. "Me? I'm Charles Rockefeller, the captain of this vessel, the pirate with a 26 billion Bailey bounty and the world's #1 swordsman." He threw back his head and flashed her a wide, self-satisfied grin. Guangye stood frozen, staring at the man who claimed such staggering fame, unsure whether to feel awe or alarm beneath his confident smile. Chapter 234, The Breath of the Beast. Charles paused at the water's edge, the morning mist curling around his boots. Before him stood a trembling young man, his clothes torn and eyes wide with fear. Charles's steel-gray gaze was calm but unyielding as he stepped forward. "You haven't even told me your name," Charles said. His voice carried easily across the low roar of the surf. "And what are you doing here, alone on this shore?" The castaway inhaled sharply, his shoulders shaking. Standing at nearly 6 feet tall, Charles looked impossibly imposing to the smaller man. I'm Kozuki, the stranger stammered, pressing his back against a jagged rock. His voice cracked. I was shipwrecked. I washed ashore last night. Charles arched an eyebrow. Shipwrecked, huh? You're not making that up, are you? Kozuki's eyes darted wildly. No, I swear it's true. He shook his head so fiercely that the thin fabric of his shirt fluttered. Charles studied him for another moment, then gave a single nod. All right, Charles said. You're coming with me. We're heading to the next island. There'll be people there who can help you. Relief flooded Kozuki's features. He dropped to one knee and bowed deeply. Thank you. Thank you so much. Charles offered a brief, reassuring smile. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and fed. With that, he turned away from the shore and led the way toward the waiting boats, the breath of the beast stirring somewhere beyond the mist. Charles hadn't expected their adversaries to let them slip away so easily, but he wasn't complaining. Captain, let's drop anchor here for a while, one of his officers piped up. We've been at sea for over half a month. Just then, Barrett strolled over, cutting in between Charles and the young woman at his side. So everyone's going ashore to rest? Charles scanned the deck and saw the crew gathered in a hopeful semicircle, their faces bright with anticipation. With a shrug and a grin, he agreed. All right, we'll stay the night. This island's swarming with wild beasts, perfect timing for a fang-hunting festival. A cheer went up instantly. Huzzah! Long live Captain Charles! Charles laughed and turned to Shi Guangyue. We'll be here a full day. Hope that's no problem for you? She waved her hand, smiling. Not at all. Good, Charles said. Everyone, let her in. Prepare to go ashore. As the crew guided the ship toward the sandy beach, spirits soared at the thought of solid ground and the excitement of a new adventure to come. Charles watched with a fond yet exasperated smile as Caesar rounded up his younger siblings on the deck. Come on, everyone. Let's go explore the island, Caesar called out, and before anyone else could move, he was the first to leap from the boat onto the sandy shore. Moments later, Tesla, Robert, and the rest of the children tumbled in after him, shrieking with excitement. Even Esda's, ever the vigilant older sister, brought up the rear, gently herding the littlest ones forward. Under Caesar's eager leadership, the whole rambunctious troop slipped ashore. Don't wander off too far, Charles called after them. Keep an eye out for wild beasts. Don't worry, Dad, Caesar yelled back over his shoulder. We'll be fine. Charles shook his head in mock irritation. You little scamp. I only said it because I don't want you getting into trouble. At that, Caesar threw back his head and roared with laughter. Charles rubbed his temples, acknowledging silently that raising this band of mischievous adventurers was both his greatest joy and his greatest headache. Not long after, Elena and the 6 martyr girls emerged from the cabin, each supported by a maid. The eldest was 7 months along, now her belly already unmistakably round. The youngest was 4 months into her pregnancy, yet every bit as radiant. As they stepped onto the beach, their eyes lit up at the sight of Charles trading playful banter with his children. They exchanged warm smiles, only to stop short when one of them noticed someone standing quietly at Charles's side. Charles stood on deck, his green hair and unusual costume impossible to ignore. His delicate features only deepened the ship's maids' frowns as they exchanged uneasy glances. Where has he disappeared to? Has he found someone new? Weren't we enough for him? They muttered among themselves. Just then, 6 women emerged from below deck, each cradling a little girl in her arms. Charles's face lit up, and he hurried over to greet them. Good morning, everyone. We'll be stopping here for the night. Half a month at sea is more than enough. Let's finally stretch our legs on solid ground. The women returned his smile, their laughter warm with maternal pride. Watching from a short distance, Guangyue recognized them at once. These were Charles's wives, and the daughters clinging to their arms were his children. All right, let's go ashore, Charles called. With baskets of provisions and daily necessities in hand, the wives and children disembarked, leaving only a small guard behind to watch the ship. As dusk fell into night, they built a roaring bonfire on the beach. Gathered around its glow, they shared a hearty feast under the star-speckled sky. The children darted between the adults, their laughter mingling with the crackle of the fire, and the shoreside banquet buzzed with life and joy. Charles woke to the bright morning sun filtering through the trees. After last night's raucous bonfire, most of the crew had slept in, rubbing the sleep from their eyes as they stirred. Charles climbed to his feet and called out, "All right, everyone, let's clean up camp and get ready to set sail." He barely had time to finish when Caesar came sprinting toward him, panic etched on his face. "Captain, look!" Caesar pointed off to the island's lee side. "A massive pirate ship is rounding the shore." At those words, Charles's hazy morning grogginess vanished. He shaded his eyes and stared out toward the sea, where an ominous black hull loomed against the horizon. A slow, intrigued smile curved his lips. "Well, this is interesting," he murmured. "What are the odds?" Straightening to his full height, he drew a deep breath. "Battle stations, everyone," he ordered, his voice calm but fierce. "Let's show them what the Sea Spirit fleet can do." The crew snapped to attention, scrambling to their posts along the beach, and at the ready, small cannons they dragged ashore. As the pirate ship drew nearer, its war flag snapping in the morning breeze, the captain on its deck threw back his head and laughed, a braying sound that carried across the water. "Ha! So you little brats think you can take on the Red Skull pirates?" His voice boomed with mockery. "Bring it on, then." Charles met the challenge with steady resolve. "Hold your fire until they're in range," he called out. "Let's give them a welcome they'll never forget." Behind him, the crew braced themselves, the tension on the beach mounting as the two ships closed in for the fight. Charles gripped the railing of the Moby Dick as the ship ground to a halt near the island's cove. Edward Whitebeard Newgate rose to his feet, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the deck. "All right, everyone, get ready to fight," Whitebeard bellowed, eyes narrowing at the shoreline. A hulking, waterlogged crewman lurched up beside him, seawater dripping in great globs from his clothes. "Is that Lord Whitebeard?" he shouted. "I want to join your crew and fight by your side." Without waiting for an answer, the newcomer dove down the gangplank and splashed ashore. "Odin, hold back! That's no job for you," Whitebeard warned, glancing anxiously at the samurai who'd stepped forward. But Kazuki Odin, his crimson kimono billowing, was already racing down the plank. Charles stiffened. Across the narrow strip of sand, the Rockefeller pirates, Whitebeard's reluctant rivals, scrambled into position. One sailor muttered, "Is that a samurai?" Barrett cracked his knuckles and advanced. Charles laid a steadying hand on his comrade's arm. "Not yet," he said quietly. "This is Odin." From the beach, Kazuki Odin Lee let out a fierce laugh. "Ha! I've come all this way to see what you're made of, gun phantom." With a roar, he unleashed a devastating flurry of strikes, scattering Barrett's men like rag dolls. Charles rose to his feet, determination blazing in his steel-blue eyes. He recognized the samurai's signature move, but Odin wasn't done. Pushing past the fallen swordsman, Odin charged forward, his wild grin growing wider. On the sand, Odin's gaze locked onto Charles, blonde hair plastered to his brow, every nerve on edge. The samurai's fighting spirit flared even higher, as if he'd found exactly the challenge he'd been looking for. "It looks like you've only provided a brief excerpt. To ensure a thorough, coherent rewrite of the entire chapter, complete with Charles as the male protagonist, I'll need the full text you'd like polished. Could you please paste the rest of the chapter?" Chapter 235, Charles vs. Whitebeard. Ha! Charles lunged forward, the seven-star sword gleaming in his right hand. Whitebeard met him head-on, bracing his twin Bicento in readiness. As they closed the gap, Charles let out a fierce cry, "Demon Slash!" With a savage swing, Charles unleashed a brilliant green arc of energy. Whitebeard's eyes widened in alarm, and he slammed his Bicento together to block. Clang! But the Demon Slash smashed through his defense with unstoppable force. "Gah!" Whitebeard roared, blood erupting from his mouth. The impact hurled him backward, tearing through tree after tree as he sailed across the battlefield. Hundreds of meters of forest snapped like twigs beneath him before he finally smashed into a distant boulder with a thunderous crash. The stone splintered, leaving a perfect human-shaped imprint in its face. Silence settled over the clearing. When the dust cleared, Whitebeard lay crumpled at the base of the rock, crimson streaking his armor. His body shuddered with the effort to move, but he remained pinned by his injuries, alive, yet utterly incapacitated. Charles stood several dozen meters away, sword still raised, chest heaving with adrenaline. The old warrior was down, and for now, Charles held the advantage. But as Whitebeard's faint tremors rippled through the earth, Charles knew this battle was far from over. Izo, one of Kazuki Oden's retainers, caught sight of the confrontation and immediately drew his pistol, aiming at Charles. Before he could fire, a massive hand clamped down over the barrel. "Don't be hasty," boomed a deep voice, Edward Whitebeard Newgate himself. In the next instant, Whitebeard vaulted forward, hefting his colossal blade, Kong Yunch, and sword toward the island. He landed nimbly, springing from one ancient tree trunk to the next, closing the distance to Charles with astonishing speed. A tense silence crackled in the air, and Charles couldn't suppress a wide grin. "Charles," Whitebeard rumbled, his mustache bristling as he returned the grin. "Newgate," Charles shot back. Their weapons rose in unison and crashed together with a thunderous boom. Sparks sprayed as crimson and emerald arcs of energy burst from the impact, rippling the ground beneath them in concentric tremors. Charles gripped the demon sword, seven-star blade, with both hands. Whitebeard met him blow for blow, Kong Yunche singing through the air. Steel clashed and wove in a deadly dance, each strike radiating raw haki. The sheer force of their duel flooded the island in a trembling aura, causing even the waves below to shudder. Far out at sea, Charles's ship, Poseidon, and Whitebeard's flagship, the Moby Dick, rocked violently in response to the titanic display of power. Countless low-level pirates went flying backward, unconscious, and plummeted into the sea. "There's no stopping them," someone cried out. Kazuki Oden lifted his head to watch the two titans still locked in combat. Barrett stormed forward, face drenched in sweat, and planted himself protectively before Charles's assembled crew. Yet even Barrett's enormous frame was like a small skiff caught in a tempest, liable to capsize under the crushing pressure of those two overbearing auras. At that moment, Esdeath stepped up beside him, gripping the sanctuary sanction in both hands. The combined domineering presences of Whitebeard and Charles rolled over her like an unstoppable wave. She wavered, but she held fast, driving her weapon's tip into the deck. With a sudden roar, she lifted her chin and stared defiantly at the storm of power bearing down on her. Then, with a flash, Esdeath's pupils dilated and a pale blue aura spiraled outward, centered on her. Side by side, she and Barrett stood firm against the residual shockwaves of Whitebeard's clash with Charles. After 5 long years, Esdeath's unparalleled might had returned. A faint chill still trailed from Esdeath's form, and Charles couldn't help but notice it. Whitebeard, too, cast a lingering, appreciative glance at her slender silhouette. Yet beneath the surface, something unexpected was unfolding. Without warning, Charles's eldest son, Caesar, began to transform. In an instant, he expanded into a 10-meter-long pink dragon that hovered in midair. A crushing wave of coercive energy radiated from the dragon's massive frame, bearing down on Caesar like an iron vice. Still, the fire of his spirit blazed brighter than any force pressing on him. With a deafening roar, the dragon's voice split the sky. Crimson and ebony auras swirled around him in a display of raw dominance, an energy almost on par with Esdeath's own power. Charles felt that same overwhelming presence surge up behind him. He turned, eyes wide with surprise and pride. "Well done, my boy," he cried. Whitebeard whipped his head around too. There, aligned behind Charles, stood 3 towering figures, his children, each radiating a formidable, domineering aura. A flicker of envy crossed Whitebeard's face as he took in the sight of Charles's majestic brood. Charles knew the road ahead would be brutal for his 3 young protégés, Barrett, Estes, and Caesar. In that instant, each of them unleashed a distinct surge of Conqueror's Haki, so fierce it stole his breath away, and left every Whitebeard pirate staring wide-eyed in shock. 4 Conqueror's Haki users on one ship, someone muttered, scarcely believing their eyes. Marco folded his arms, utterly stunned. When had kingly Haki become so commonplace? 4 masters of Conqueror's Haki on a single vessel, and if the rumors were true, the world's greatest swordsman, Mahawk, was lurking somewhere on this very island. Add Whitebeard himself into the mix, and you had 6 wielders of the supreme Haki gathered on this remote shore, an unthinkable concentration of power. A sudden roar of waves announced more arrivals. 2 ships thundered in side by side, their prows grinding to a halt on the beach. Roronoa Zoro sprang ashore from one. Whitebeard himself strode down from the other. "Long time no see, Whitebeard," Zoro called out, flashing his trademark smirk. And long time no see, Charles, Whitebeard boomed, his booming laughter rolling across the sand. Zoro's sharp chuckle and Whitebeard's mighty guffaw merged into a single, earth-shaking sound. Whitebeard hefted his giant hook and thundered, "Charles, my boy, it's been far too many years." Zoro shot Charles a sideways grin and inclined his head in salute, an unspoken promise that this long-awaited reunion was only the beginning. Charles stood at the forefront of the Rockefeller pirates, every crewman behind him, weapons drawn. Facing them, Whitebeard and his entire Whitebeard pirates crew mirrored the stance, cutlasses and pistols glinting in their hands. On Charles's side stood Barrett, Estes, and Caesar. Opposing them were Marco, Jaws, and Vista. A tense silence fell as hundreds of pirates from both sides locked eyes across the battlefield. Charles and Whitebeard cried out in unison, "Drop your loot and stand down." Their voices barely faded before Charles bellowed, "Kill!" At once, Marco burst into his phoenix form, wings of flame stretching wide as he hurtled toward Barrett. "Attack!" he screeched. Barrett only smiled, tightened his gauntlet, and charged headlong into the fiery onslaught. Simultaneously, Charles lunged at Whitebeard, blades clashing with a shower of sparks. In moments, the duel lines formed, Barrett versus Marco, Caesar versus Jose, and Estes versus Vista. Around them, the two pirate crews erupted into chaos. Cutlasses slashed, pistols barked, and fists met flesh. Amid the roar of battle, Charles's five master swordsmen wove through the fray. Under their expert guidance, the Rockefeller swordsmen sought out Whitebeard's captains, turning each confrontation into a whirlwind of steel. Yet despite their skill, neither side could claim the upper hand. The clash of titans and the cry of pirates echoed across the deck, and the fight showed no sign of letting up. Chapter 236. For 3 days straight, the Rockefeller and Whitebeard fleets clashed in a brutal stalemate. Cannon fire lit up the sky and steel rang on steel without pause. On the third day at dawn, Charles and Whitebeard finally lowered their weapons, gasping for air. Their once pristine coats were stained and torn, but as they caught each other's eye, relief broke into laughter. Around them, both crews stood stunned and exhausted, yet remarkably, no one lay dead. Despite the draw, the Rockefeller pirates had generally held the upper hand until Kazuki Oden made his return. 3 days earlier, he'd been struck down and decapitated in a single devastating blow from Xiao Luo, left entirely unable to fight. But on this third morning, sheer force of will brought him back to his feet. Barely healed, he charged into the fray, only to be intercepted by Barrett. Barrett shifted into his devil fruit form and threw himself at Oden and Marco both at once. For a time, he managed to keep the two titans at bay, trading furious blows that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Still, his endurance was draining fast. The outcome of the entire engagement now rested on this furious three-way duel, and everyone watching knew Barrett simply could not hold out against the combined might of Kazuki Oden and Marco. Under the captain's shouts, the skirmish abruptly ended. Pirates from both sides paused, exchanged wary glances, then broke into broad grins. Within moments, crews were unloading barrels of rum, platters of roast meat, and crates of exotic fruit along the shoreline. Long tables groaned beneath the bounty as torches were lit and lanterns hung from rigging overhead. Charles found a spot on a driftwood log beside the legendary Whitebeard. Flames crackled, sending sparks dancing into the starry sky. Whitebeard lifted a heavy goblet of dark rum, his great white beard catching the firelight. He slapped his knee and bellowed with laughter. "Ho, ho, ho, Charles! By the 7 seas! It's been years! I've been holed up on my island so long, I almost forgot what sea air smelled like. Why would I ever venture back out?" Charles shrugged, tossing a pebble into the embers. Island life can be a bit predictable. After a while, the fish taste the same, and the days blur together. Whitebeard's eyes twinkled. Didn't I tell you? I grew tired of waiting. I want to sail around the world, see every coast and every port. Consider tonight our launching point." Charles lifted his own goblet and took a slow, appreciative sip. Around them, children laughed as they chased lanterns, and pirates exchanged stories over steaming platters. The air smelled of spiced meat and sea salt. "So you're finally chasing your dream," Charles said, a smile tugging at his lips. Whitebeard threw back his head and roared, "Aye, lad, and what about you? What made you leave your hideaway?" Charles leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his eyes. I realize there's more to life than hiding. The world's too big to stay cooped up. I had to see it for myself. A toast, then? Whitebeard raised his goblet high, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. To new adventures and uncharted waters. Charles met his gaze and clinked his cup against Whitebeard's. Overhead, the lanterns swayed, and the waves lapped gently at the shore, witnesses to a new voyage about to begin. Charles watched as Whitebeard's eyes lit up. "Why don't you introduce your children to me?" he asked warmly. Charles glanced at his little ones and called, "Kids, come over here." A cluster of 7 children, mostly 4 or 5 years old, who had been playing with Kazuki Odin, scampered to Charles in an instant. Seeing them, Whitebeard's face broke into a broad, fatherly grin. "Children," he rumbled cheerfully, "this is your Uncle Whitebeard. Give him a greeting." Charles beamed and encouraged them. "Go on, say hello to Uncle Whitebeard." All except Estes and Caesar immediately cried out in sweet unison, "Hello, Uncle Whitebeard." Their eager voices made Whitebeard's eyes twinkle. "Very good," he chuckled. "Now, line up and introduce yourselves to me." The children formed a neat row and announced themselves one by one, heads held high. "I'm Tesla, 7 years old. I'm Robert, 5. I'm Sif, 5 this year. I'm Daedara, also 5. And I'm Eve, 5 years old." Whitebeard clapped his hands delightedly, thoroughly charmed by this lively brood. Charles watched warily as Whitebeard strode up to the 5 little ghosts and held out his hand. "Hey kids, want to be my son?" Before Charles could object, Whitebeard feigned indignation. "You dare volunteer in front of me, you little brat! Don't take me lightly." Charles's face flushed. He jabbed a finger at the old pirate. "Cut the rubbish, old man!" Whitebeard threw back his head and roared with laughter. Marcochas and Bista joined in, and even Kazuki Odin leaped forward, clapping his hands. "That's the spirit! Go have fun, everyone!" Charles sighed and waved them off. But the 5 little ghosts ignored him, darting straight to Odin and chattering excitedly. "Uncle Odin, look at this!" Charles raised an eyebrow as Odin effortlessly gathered the children around him. He'd never been fond of the samurai, but there was no denying Odin's charisma. He'd won them over in seconds. Shaking his head with a small smile, Charles turned to Estes and Caesar, who still lingered behind. "All right, you two, let's move." Charles stepped forward with a warm grin. "Newgate, meet my eldest daughter, Estes, and my eldest son, Caesar." Estes lifted her chin and regarded Newgate with a cool, distracted gaze. Beside her, Caesar yawned so conspicuously that he nearly forgot to murmur, "Hello, sir." Charles couldn't help but sigh. "Come on, you two, show a little respect. This man's been like a brother to me. Estes, you were barely more than a babe when he used to carry you around." Newgate's white beard trembled as he chuckled. "Humph." He turned to the children. "Your old man here spoils you rotten." Charles tilted his wineglass in a mock toast. "They're still kids. They'll grow up in their own time." Newgate slammed a gauntleted fist on the table, setting their glasses to rattling. "Oh, they'll grow up all right," he rumbled, "and one day they'll surpass me. Prove it to the old man, won't you?" Estes squared her shoulders, eyes flashing. "Challenge accepted, Dad." Caesar cracked a confident smile. "Count me in." As soon as Whitebeard's words rang out, the entire camp fell silent. After all, he was the man spoken of far and wide as the world's strongest. Yet the moment he laid eyes on Estes standing there, he couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh at the innocence of those childlike words. Charles, too, was momentarily speechless. "Har, har, har!" Whitebeard bellowed, clapping his massive hands together. "Tonight we celebrate. Let loose and have fun." No sooner had he spoken than servants began laying out lavish feasts on every table. Whitebeard strode forward, holding aloft a single, precious bottle of wine. "Ho, ho, ho! This vintage has been my most treasured possession for years," he announced, eyes twinkling. "I wouldn't dream of opening it for anyone but you lot." With exaggerated care, he poured a generous goblet and presented it to Charles, making sure not a single drop splashed over the rim. Charles's eyes shone at the honor. "Truly?" he whispered, awed. "Then I must be the first to try it." Whitebeard let out another booming laugh and smacked the table so hard it shook. "Hold your horses. Don't gulp it down. You'll be asleep before the moon's even halfway up." He leaned forward, grin wide, recalling all the battles, the nights spent swapping tales, the camaraderie. "And if you manage not to get drunk tonight, you'll be the first to claim you're stronger than me." With that challenge in his voice, Charles lifted the goblet to his lips and took a long, deliberate sip, ready for whatever the night might bring. As soon as the liquid reached his stomach, Charles felt as if his insides were on fire. Good heavens, what a potent punch, and all at once. Chapter 237. Dawn was just breaking when Charles groaned awake, one hand pressed to his pounding skull. Last night's binge had knocked him out stone cold again, and he already knew who would be first to tease him about it. "Ha! Up and at 'em! Lightweight!" came the familiar roar. Whitebeard lounged by the dying embers of the fire, a wine gourd in hand. "Can't hold your liquor, can you, Charles?" Charles sat up, wincing. "It's not my fault." Whitebeard only cackled louder, the sound echoing off the surrounding trees. Charles flushed beneath his tousled hair. "What are you so ashamed of, you useless bastard?" Whitebeard chuckled, eyes sparkling with amusement. Charles opened his mouth to fire back, but all he managed was an indignant snort. The laughter grew until half the camp stirred, sleep-fogged faces peering through the gloom. "Dad, quit it. Morning's too early for this," one of the crew groaned, rubbing his eyes. Whitebeard shot him a mock glare. "Shut it, Newgate! One more word and our friendship's over." Charles jumped to his feet. "No, Captain, he started it." Whitebeard turned on Charles, scrutinizing him for a tense moment. Then he threw back his head and laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha! That's my boy!" he bellowed, slapping Charles on the shoulder. And as the sun's first rays peeked over the horizon, the camp was filled with the warm, rumbling laugh of their father figure, and Charles couldn't help but crack a grin. Charles clenched his fists, frustration burning in his eyes. "I'm not telling you. Why are you so impatient?" Whitebeard let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Impatient, you say? Scared you'll lose your tongue if you speak?" Charles shook his head. "Forget it. Let's have a drink. This brawl's done. I'm off to continue my journey. Maybe we'll meet again down the line." He rose from his seat and called out to his crew. "All right, Rockefeller pirates, prepare to set sail." At his command, the entire crew sprang into action. Whitebeard watched silently as Charles's men boarded their colossal ship, marveling at its size. "That's one impressive vessel," he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, Kazuki Odin stepped up beside Whitebeard, a broad grin on his face. Before Odin could speak, Whitebeard's fist shot out, striking him square in the chest. With a startled yelp, Odin flew backward and landed hard on the deck. Clutching his ribs, Odin shook his head in disbelief. "Oi, what was that for?" Whitebeard's eyes blazed. 3 days ago, you acted without my orders. I'll not tolerate that kind of insubordination." Odin pushed himself upright, anger flashing in his gaze. "You old stubborn." Whitebeard cut him off with a hard glare, making it clear that defiance came at a price. Kazuki Odin scratched the back of his head and let out a tinkling laugh when he caught wind of their request. Whitebeard, seated at the head of the long dining table, sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, Odin," he rumbled. "Tell us about this, Charles." No sooner had he spoken than the whole crew of the Moby Dick erupted in cheers. "Papa!" they called in unison, thundering their cups against the wooden boards. Odin glanced at his old friend and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you want to know about Charles?" Whitebeard folded his massive arms and leaned back in his chair. "A little. Word is he's strong." "Strong?" Odin's eyes gleamed as he folded his fists with excitement. "Of course he is. He's counted among the 4 emperors in the New World. His reputation is right on par with yours, Papa. But between us, I still think you're unbeatable." Just then, Marco drifted forward, plucking at the edge of his captain's coat. "That's right," he agreed. "No one here doubts it. But Charles, he's something else. Ever hear his epithet? The world's greatest swordsman. Every up-and-coming blade wielder dreams of crossing blades with him. I can't even count how many challengers have tried and failed." Vista, overhearing the last remark, narrowed his eyes and set aside the last bite of his meal. "Wait a moment," he interjected. "You're telling me the man I dueled was the world's greatest swordsman?" Odin nodded enthusiastically. "The very same. He's as calm as he is lethal. Face him on the field, and you'll see why his name strikes fear into every would-be challenger." A hush fell over the table as each pirate contemplated the legend of Charles, one more formidable rival to add to the tales already whispered across the seas. "Is he truly the world's greatest swordsman?" Kazuki Odin whispered, astonishment coloring his tone. Whitebeard gave a solemn nod. Without question. Of all the blade masters I've known, none rivals him. Every quarter acknowledges him as the number one. Odin's face hardened. His hand twitched at the hilts of the twin blades, Yanmo and Tianyu, resting at his hips. A surge of excitement and challenge coursed through him. To facing the best swordsman alive was an opportunity no warrior could ignore. If he slew Charles, he would claim that lofty title for himself. Yonko, Odin said, fixing Whitebeard with a steady gaze. I've decided. I will challenge him. Whitebeard, in mid-sip of his wine, choked and spat it onto the deck. He glared down at Odin. Are you out of your mind? Do you really think you can beat Charles? Have you forgotten how he felled you in a single stroke just 3 days ago? Odin's cheeks flushed with embarrassment under the pirate lord's scornful stare. Yet, beneath his embarrassment, his resolve only deepened. He drew a steady breath and met Whitebeard's eyes, determined to prove himself worthy. 3 days ago, I fell to a single, flawless strike, and it's taken me every one of those days just to get my pulse back under control. Every time I replay that moment in my mind, my heart still races. There's no denying it. His strength truly is just a little beyond mine. Kazuki Odin thumped his chest with a grin. Doesn't matter. Shiroige. Sure, I couldn't beat him today, but that doesn't mean I won't someday. Give me a few more years, and I swear the world's greatest swordsman title will be mine. Whitebeard stroked his thick white beard and let out a low chuckle. Is that so? Funny, though. I always thought Charles was older than you. Odin froze. Older? He'd assumed the man who bested him must have more years and more experience under his belt. You mean he's younger than me? Whitebeard nodded. Born in 1463 on the Haiyuan calendar, that makes him a full year younger than you. Odin's jaw dropped. What? He claimed the world's top swordsmanship at only 25. But that was 3 years ago. Whitebeard tapped his chin, brows furrowed. That's what the records say. 22 years old and already unrivaled? Odin exploded. How did he manage that? At that age, most are barely mastering the basics. Whitebeard shrugged. Who knows? All I know is, he set the standard, and now the entire world chases it. Odin's eyes blazed. Then I'll train harder, I'll close that gap, and one day, I'll be the one they call the world's greatest swordsman. At 25, he was already the world's greatest swordsman. And what was he doing now? Battling a band of coastal robbers, of all things. Come on, rumbled Whitebeard, clapping Kazuki Odin on the shoulder. You've got a long way to go if you want to outshine Charles. For a moment, Odin's shoulders slumped, but then a fire sparked in his eyes. He raised his voice toward the horizon, where Charles's ship had just vanished. I swear I'll become the world's top swordsman, no matter what it takes. Whitebeard's grin split his broad face. Fine by me. From this day forward, you're captain of my 2nd division. He turned to the crew. All right, lads, give a warm welcome to Captain Kazuki Odin. With that, Whitebeard swept Odin into a hearty embrace. A roar of approval went up from the deckhands, gunners, and helmsmen. They admired Odin's tenacity. When he first tried to board, he'd clung to the hull for 3 days and nights, even as his hands swelled and his strength ebbed, refusing to let go until they allowed him aboard. Not a single soul objected to him joining us, Whitebeard continued, his voice booming. That spirit, that iron will, deserves a place in our family, so let's hear it. The entire crew erupted once more, stamping their feet and hollering Captain Odin's name. And under that thunderous welcome, a new chapter of adventure set sail. It looks like I've only received a brief fragment. Have a party, Whitebeard roared loudly. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete passage, I'll happily transform it into a polished, idiomatic English version with Charles as our main character. Chapter 238. Poseidon's voice boomed across the deck. Good boy, you truly have the bearing of a king, the heart of a king. Why have you hidden it from me? Charles shifted under his father's intense gaze. The sea god strode back and forth, eyes never leaving his son, and Charles felt a knot of unease tighten in his chest. Father, Charles began, swallowing hard, I don't know either. That day when I was overwhelmed with excitement, an aura just poured out of me. I still don't understand why. But now, I try to call it forth, and nothing comes. Poseidon paused, stroking his beard as he studied Charles. A king's aptitude like yours must not go to waste. From this moment on, your training doubles. A chill ran down Charles's spine. Double training? He stared at his father, panic rising. Every day you will do 500 push-ups in the gravity chamber, Poseidon continued, and you will drill the basic movements I taught you 100 times each. Charles's face fell. He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. Yes, father. Poseidon's expression softened just a fraction. Good. Begin. I watched Caesar turn his head slowly, his eyes pleading for the last few minutes to have been nothing more than a dreadful dream. I met Estes' gaze with a small, satisfied smile. You certainly exceeded my expectations today, I said. How does it feel to finally wield the Overlord's domination? That unmistakable aura, Esdeath's domination, has been a constant puzzle for me. Ever since Estes first triggered it at age 5, I'd been desperate to see it in action, but she always resisted. I'd tried every trick in the book to draw out that commanding glare, all to no avail. At one point, I was so convinced that someone was holding her back that I swore I'd tear Green Pepper apart if he ever crossed my path again. Speaking of Green Pepper, he's become quite the storm in the New World lately. His 8 treasures navy now boasts thousands of sailors, and under the leadership of the fierce Qingjiao, they've grown bolder by the day, prowling the Grand Line, harassing the Golden Lion pirates, and carving out their own reputation. Yet curiously, even with all that swagger, they've steered clear of the Rockefeller pirates so far. Charles watched his eldest daughter, Estes, stiffen at his praise, her proud expression unchanging. He sighed. My eldest is growing more headstrong by the day, he muttered to himself. Then he turned to the rest of his children, Tesla, Robert, Sif, Daedara, and Eve, each waiting expectantly. Drawing a large wooden chest toward him, Charles lifted its lid to reveal his most prized possessions, over 20 devil fruits, each glowing with strange iridescent colors. He cleared his throat. You're all about 5 years old now, well, except for Tesla, who's 7, and it's time you had the power to protect yourselves. I'm setting off on a journey around the world, and who knows what dangers lie ahead. So, I want each of you to choose one devil fruit. A gasp rippled around the room as the children stared at the densely packed fruits. 25 in all, each unique in shape and hue. The sight was almost overwhelming. Go on, Charles encouraged, his gaze softening as he looked at their eager faces. Pick the devil fruit you feel drawn to. From today on, your strength will be your own. Chapter Text: The Devil's Banquet. Charles stared at the array of devil fruits laid out before him, each one carefully catalogued and secured after years of painstaking effort. A recent friendly match with the Whitebeard pirates had painfully exposed the weaknesses of his crew. Too many of them couldn't protect themselves in a pinch. If his men couldn't hold their own, then his children would have to be stronger. That's why I'm giving these to you now, Charles said, voice steady. He swept an arm over the table, where a dozen mysterious, knobbly fruits glowed under the lamplight. Every one of these fruits is documented. You may choose whichever you like. His words left the 4 young boys exchanging glances. At last they nodded to Ard, the second-born 7-year-old Tesla. As the eldest after their big brother, Tesla had earned the right to pick first. Tesla padded forward, brows furrowed as he scanned the fruits. After a moment, he shook his head. Father, none of these appeal to me yet. I need time to think. Charles smiled and ruffled Tesla's hair. Very well, take your time. They'll all be here when you decide. Relieved, Tesla retreated, and Robert, slightly younger, stepped up in his place. His eyes darted from the smoky haze of the dark fruit to the shimmering sparkles of the thunder. But it was the wrinkled, misty orb in the first row that caught his attention. He reached out confidently and lifted the gas fruit from its pedestal. Its pale surface rippled like rising steam. Robert held it close, determination shining in his eyes. Charles nodded approvingly. Excellent choice. From this day on, you'll become as intangible as air itself. Robert grinned, cradling his new devil fruit prize. Meanwhile, Tesla watched thoughtfully from the edge of the lamplight, pondering which power would suit him best. Their father's gift had set them on a new path, one that would change all their lives forever. Charles's eyes lit up as Robert held the strange, bulbous fruit in his hand. Dad, I want this gas fruit. Robert glanced at his son, then at the swirling patterns on the fruit's rind. Charles gave an eager nod. Without a word, Robert bit into the devil fruit. At first, his face twisted in revulsion, Waves of nausea threatened to overturn his stomach, but he forced himself to chew deliberately, recalling tales of the mysterious powers such fruits bestowed. Morsel by morsel, he devoured the entire fruit. No sooner had he swallowed the last bite than his form wavered. In an instant, Robert's body dissolved into a drifting pale vapor that filled the room. Alarm bells rang in Charles's mind. He leapt forward, channeling his armament Haki into a solidified punch, and struck the wispy shape of his father's head. "Hold still," he shouted. "Ouch!" The gas coalesced, regrouping until Robert stood there again in solid flesh, clutching his skull. Charles exhaled in relief. He'd nearly lost control of the situation. "This fruit, it emits poisonous gas," Charles warned, sweeping a hand through the lingering fog. "If anyone else breathed it in, everyone in this room except Esther and me, they'd be crippled by the fumes." Robert rubbed his temples, still dazed. Charles stepped back, eyes sharp and watchful. "Be careful from now on," Charles said firmly. "No more surprises." Robert managed a shaky nod. Father and son stood amid the dissipating mist, both with a newfound respect for the peril and power hidden within a single unassuming fruit. "Be careful with the gas fruit. It's deadly if mishandled. One wrong move, and everyone downwind could suffer gas poisoning. Keep it under strict control." Charles shot Robert a warning glare. Robert stumbled back, sulking. At that moment, Sif strode forward without even glancing at the other devil fruits. She reached out and snatched up the lone remaining Logia-type fruit, the snow fruit. "Daddy, I want this one," she chirped, cradling it protectively in her small hands. Charles gave a firm nod, though he couldn't help but notice Eve's crestfallen expression. Eve had clearly been eyeing the same fruit, but the rule was clear. First come, first served. Sif wasted no time. She bit into the snow fruit, her brow furrowing for an instant as she swallowed. Almost immediately, a cold wave swept through the room. Snowflakes swirled around her, condensing into a smooth, rounded mound of snow. "Daddy, help me!" The snowdrift quivered, and a tiny face formed on its surface, eyes wide with panic. "I can't change back!" Charles shook his head, amusement flickering in his eyes as he watched the bewildered pile of snow. "Hold on, Sif," he said with a grin. "We'll figure this out." Chapter 239. Charles refused to hand over a devil fruit before the children were ready. They were simply too young to master its power. He rose to his feet and surveyed the little snowbank at his feet. Almost instinctively, he channeled his armament Haki, hardening his arms and pressing them against the drift. In an instant, Sif's elemental form dissolved, and her body snapped back to its original shape. Sif gaped at her arms and legs in astonishment. It changed back. Then it changed again. "This is amazing. I want to keep playing." She clapped her hands and danced around, examining every inch of herself with childlike delight. Charles smiled. "That's great, but you'd better practice controlling your energy. What will you do when I'm not here to help you?" He reached out and tapped her on the forehead in a gentle, teasing scold. "Stay focused, okay?" Sif stuck out her tongue and backed away, giggling. Just then, Deidara, the younger of the two, couldn't contain himself any longer. "Dad, I want that bomb fruit. I want to be Bomberman." His shout rang through the room, brimming with excitement. Charles crouched down and regarded him with amusement. The boy was so eager. How could he fault him? With a patient smile, Charles rose and opened the cabinet. From the second shelf, he lifted a small wooden box containing the coveted bomb fruit. Charles pulled a violet-hued apple from the box and handed it to Deidara. Without hesitation, Deidara bit into it, only to gag as a wave of nausea washed over him. He fought to keep it down and swallowed it in one trembling gulp. "Ugh!" he croaked, pressing a hand to his lips. "Quick! Milk! I need something to rinse my mouth!" At Charles's urgent gesture, the maid darted forward with a fresh glass of milk. Deidara seized it and drained it in one large swallow. But the moment he did, the cup exploded in a deafening crash. Shards of glass scattered, and milk splattered across the floor. In a puff of smoke, the cup vanished entirely, leaving Deidara's cheeks and collar soaked white. His small face twitched, tears springing to his eyes. "Ah!" he sobbed, overwhelmed by shock and injustice. Everyone nearby froze, stunned by the sudden explosion and Deidara's tear-streaked expression, unsure how to react. Sif froze in terror, and then her power flared out of control. In an instant, her body dissolved into a mound of snow at the edge of the courtyard. Charles winced. Not again. He took a steadying breath. Deidara's bomb fruit was unpredictably powerful. If she couldn't control it, someone could get hurt. From this moment on, Deidara will be under the constant care of our strongest maids, he ordered. That fruit's power isn't trifling. Without sufficient strength, she could hurt herself, or worse, someone else. One word, master, one of the maids replied with a bow. I'll see to it right away. Another maid rolled her eyes. There's no crying in men, you know. Charles ignored the chiding as he knelt beside Deidara, gently stroking her hair. With a few whispered words and a flicker of his aura, he coaxed Sif back into her original form, a trembling little girl blinking up at him. He couldn't shake the uneasy thought that something else was at play here. How had these children briefly managed to stabilize their devil fruit powers? The only answer he could find was those strange seafloor stones he'd seen nearby. Surely they were amplifying or grounding the fruit's energies. Charles sighed inwardly. He'd been too hasty handing out devil fruits to children so young. In truth, he should have waited until they were at least 7 or 8. But the fruits were already eaten, and regret did no good now. Leaning close to Deidara, he spoke softly but firmly. Listen carefully. Until you've learned to control your fruit, you must not use it under any circumstances. From now on, one of your older sisters will stay by your side and look after you. Do you understand? Deidara nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. Charles offered her a small, reassuring smile. Keeping her fee would be his top priority, until she was strong enough to take care of herself. Charles flashed a reassuring grin. Don't worry, Dad's already got a plan. Deidara, her makeup smudged and hair wild from the explosion, still had tear tracks on her cheeks. She looked every bit the bedraggled tabby cat she'd been compared to. Charles gave her a friendly wave, and she huffed in frustration before stumbling back to the sidelines. That left just one child, little Eve, who hovered at the edge of the clearing with wide, frightened eyes. Kneeling to be at eye level, Charles offered a gentle smile. It's okay, Eve. I'm right here. Why don't you come pick out your favorite devil fruit? He held out his hand. Normally so timid and reserved, Eve's head dropped under the weight of the other's stares. Yet at his warm encouragement, he took a trembling breath and stepped forward. Inside the glass cabinet, rows of devil fruits gleamed under the lights. Eve scanned the nature department's swamp fruit. No thanks. Turning into mud was hardly glamorous. The animal department fruits looked equally monstrous. At last, his gaze settled on the superhuman series. The promise of incredible strength and skill made his heart race. Eve reached out, fingers brushing the smooth, swirling surface of the chosen fruit. His small voice, barely above a whisper, held a new resolve. I'll take this one. Charles carefully plucked the large, verdant devil fruit from its perch and handed it to Eve. Her eyes lit up as she cradled it in both hands. Then, after a quick moment's hesitation, she bit into its leathery skin. Her face scrunched up exactly like someone who's eaten a devil fruit for the first time, but she forced down the nausea and finished it in one determined chomp. She stared at her fingers, closed her eyes, and nothing happened. Eve's brow furrowed in confusion. Charles grinned. Fetch me a flower pot. The maid scurried off and returned moments later with a simple clay pot holding a young sapling. Charles set it on the table and said, All right, Eve, try to control this flower. Eager to prove herself, Eve knelt beside the pot, raised her hands just above the tender shoot, and focused every ounce of her will on it. Suddenly her body began to sway, as if caught in an invisible dance. With each graceful twist and turn, the sapling shivered, shot upward, and burst into blossom. Within seconds, blooms of every color had exploded across the room, petals carpeting the floor and filling the air with their sweet scent. Eve's eyes shone with triumph, and Charles couldn't have been more proud. The moment they stepped inside, the chamber seemed to burst into bloom. Everywhere they looked, vivid flowers carpeted the walls and floor in a riot of color. It felt like standing in a living painting. This is stunning, Sif whispered, her eyes wide as she reached out to brush a glowing petal. Eve turned slowly in place, taking in the floral spectacle. She still couldn't believe she'd conjured all of this herself. Not bad at all, she murmured, a spark of pride in her voice. I'm going to keep refining this devil fruit technique. Charles gave Eve an approving thumbs up. She flushed pink and returned his gesture with a confident nod. All right, everyone, Charles said, raising his voice to gather their attention. You've each picked your devil fruits. Now it's time to head back, but remember to control your powers. Robert, Didara, I'm talking to you two especially. Your fruits, the gas fruit and the bomb fruit, are incredibly destructive if they go haywire. We can't afford any casualties. He looked sternly at Robert and Didara. Both of them understood exactly what was at stake. Once those abilities spiraled out of control, the fallout would be catastrophic. With that caution ringing in their ears, they prepared to leave the flower-filled chamber behind. Chapter 240, Young Ambitions Below Deck. Yes, Dad! Robert and Didara answered in unison, their voices echoing against the ship's wooden planks. Charles nodded once, crisply. All right, you four, break, he ordered. From now on, if there's anything you don't understand, come straight to me or anyone else aboard. Your days of easy living are over. Mornings are for lessons, afternoons for training. He turned his gaze to the quartet, Robert, Didara, Sif, and Eve. The energy and excitement that had lit up their faces moments ago vanished instantly, replaced by stubborn little frowns. Charles didn't soften his expression. In this world, and especially with him still a pirate captain, countless eyes were watching his family's every move. He would never let them grow complacent. Strength came first. Estes, he called, shifting his attention to the eldest sister, you're in charge of keeping these four on task. No slacking. Understood, Dad. 10-year-old Estes snapped to attention, standing perfectly straight. She glanced at her younger siblings, a determined smile lifting the corners of her mouth. They might have been reluctant, but with their big sister on watch, they had no choice but to obey. Charles watched as his younger crew members gazed at him with a mixture of awe and, he suspected, a touch of fear. He raised a hand. All right, that's enough. You lot head below deck and train harder. If you can't defend yourselves when it really counts, what good are you? Yes, Father, they chorused, saluted, and filed out. Left alone in the chamber were nothing but a sea of blossoms and two silent maids. Charles gathered the devil fruits into their protective crates and tucked them away. The air still carried a sharp tang of pollen. He waved dismissively. Clean this up, he ordered, then turned and strode out. On the deck, he drew in a deep lungful of salt-tanged breeze and closed his eyes. For a moment, the world felt right again. Then a soft voice drifted from the companionway. Charles. He opened his eyes to see Shi Tianyue standing on the stairs. He almost didn't recognize her, the refined woman he'd rescued on that remote island, the chance encounter that led them into the Whitebeard pirates' territory, and the 3 days and nights of polite, even friendly exchange. He'd sensed something more in her thoughtful gaze, but he'd never pressed for the truth. Now she was here, alone. Charles squared his shoulders and stepped forward. Miss Shi, he said evenly, what brings you aboard? Miss Shi, it's been a while. I was supposed to see you off to the next island, but with so much happening these past few days, I completely forgot. Charles stepped onto the deck and offered an apologetic bow to Tianyue Shi. I'm sorry for the delay. Tianyue smiled serenely. Please don't worry, Mr. Charles. I'm not in any rush. Her calm confidence reminded him why he'd agreed to help her, and why he trusted her implicitly. Over the past few days, he'd seen her courage under pressure, and he knew she was a good person. Very well, he said, waving a hand to summon his crew. I'll have the ship prepared for departure at once. Tianyue inclined her head, then paused, as if weighing her words. Charles stopped and turned back. He sensed there was something she hadn't yet said. Drawing in a steadying breath, she finally spoke. Mr. Charles, have you ever heard of Wano country? Taken aback by her sudden question, Charles frowned in surprise. He'd imagined they'd have more time before she broached such a topic. Of course I know Wano country. Kozuki Oden, the daimyo who shared drinks with us last night, hails from there. Why do you ask? Tianyue's eyes flickered with resolve. She glanced down at her hands, then met his gaze again. Because, Charles leaned forward, curiosity written on his face. Because what? Silence stretched between them as the ship's sails snapped in the breeze, leaving the answer hanging in the air. Kozuki Oden comes from Wano country, so why did he insist he knows nothing about it? Tianyue Shi frowned in confusion. Just yesterday at the banquet, Oden had been dressed exactly like her. When she pressed him about Wano, explaining that she wanted to return home, He'd simply shaken his head and claimed he had no idea where it was. Was he lying? Charles found himself equally baffled. Hadn't Odin only just left Wano? He remembered vividly how swollen Odin's body looked when they first met, like someone who'd been submerged in water for days. Clearly, after completing some request for Whitebeard, Odin had gone to sea and joined the Whitebeard pirates. Later, he'd encountered Tianyu Shi on that island. In fact, Charles had been close enough to hear her call for help before Odin did. Suddenly, it all made sense. Perhaps Odin pretended ignorance because he never wanted to return. After all, for as long as Charles could recall, Odin had dreamed of escaping Wano, and by joining Whitebeard's crew, he'd finally broken free of his homeland's confines. Charles watched Tianyu closely and finally understood. As soon as she'd mentioned wanting to go to Wano country, he'd known Lord Kazuki Odin would forbid it, so she'd claimed she'd never even heard of the place. Now the pieces fit together in his mind. He squared his shoulders and asked, "Miss Shi, do you actually want to go to Wano?" Tianyu froze for a moment, then nodded almost before she could think. Realizing her slip, she glanced up at Charles in confusion, cheeks flushing. He just grinned, warm and open as a spring sunrise, though anyone who knew him well would have suspected mischief behind that smile. "Perfect timing," he said. "The next stop for the Rockefeller pirates is Wano country. You're welcome to sail with us." Tianyue's eyes widened. She frowned in hesitation, uncertainty warring with relief. Charles was already reaching out, gently steadying her shoulders so she wouldn't stumble. Finally, she bowed slightly. "Thank you, Captain Charles." He nodded, heart swelling at her trust. Together, they turned to join the rest of the crew, bound for adventure on the shores of Wano. Charles's hand settled gently on Tianyue's shoulders. In an instant, her ears flushed crimson and a delicate pink bloomed across her cheeks. Seeing her reaction, Charles allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Wano country lay at the very edge of the New World, a remote archipelago, barely charted, with only rumors whispered among sailors. Few vessels ventured that far, and even fewer mapmakers knew its true location. Yet Charles knew exactly where it was. Back on Beehive Island, Charles had drawn upon the sea god Poseidon's power to peer into the mind of one of the island's inkfish guardians, the great black-skinned leviathans that patrolled its reefs. In the creature's memory, he discovered the hidden signposts marking the route to Wano. Silently, he committed every turn and tide to memory, then painstakingly sketched them onto his own chart. With that map in hand, he could sail there whenever he wished. Now, leaning over the ship's navigation table, Charles gave the terse order, "Set a course for Wano country." Almost at once, Poseidon whirled the vessel around. The sails filled with wind, and the ocean swelled beneath the prow, steering them into the deep blue enigma of the New World. As for why they'd suddenly charted a course for Wano, Charles merely told Tianyu that it was her idea, and in truth, his curiosity had been piqued the moment she'd mentioned the name. The rest, he decided, would reveal itself on the journey. Wano country boasts an unparalleled abundance of devil fruits and the widest variety of beasts anywhere in the world. It's no exaggeration to say that nearly half of all known animal and mythical-type devil fruits can be found there. Whether the legendary Wano country devil fruit still lies hidden within its borders, however, remains a mystery.